A significant change for all of us today. Much milder, but also wetter and windy. As Atlantic-dominated weather returns, that means a wet start for many parts of the country away from the far east and southeast, although even in the east and southeast we'll see some rain arrive into the afternoon. The heaviest rain will always be towards the north and the west. Just spells of wet and blustery weather moving through, interspersed by some drier interludes, and it will turn a bit brighter across the north and west by the end of the afternoon. And with that strong southwesterly breeze blowing, while temperatures are much higher compared with recent days, 13 to 15 Celsius in one or two spots. But we end the day with further showery weather coming into Scotland, some heavy downpours, although I think a better chance of some drier and clearer interludes as we end the afternoon and go into the evening. Likewise for Northern Ireland, actually some reasonable dry weather, showers tending to become fewer and further between, plenty of dry weather as the day comes to an end across the Midlands, Wales and the southwest, although some lingering cloud and spots of rain in the southeast. It's not going to be a frosty one, though, because we're soon going to see more cloud, rain and wind arrive overnight. And during the early hours, some noisy weather across many southern and western parts of the country, spreading eventually to all areas by dawn. But again, the wettest and windiest weather will be in the west. Temperatures in the double figures, though, first thing Friday, so a marked contrast compared with the chilly mornings that we've seen a lot of recently. But the wind and rain could be disruptive first thing on Friday, particularly across Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, parts of West Wales. Wind gusts up to 70 miles an hour and spells of rain leading to 40 or even 70 millimetres over western hills. It does dry up a little in the west as the rain clears eastwards into the afternoon and the wind stays blustery but less strong in the afternoon.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're giving you not one, but two chances to win this month, with two prize bundles that include an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash. But that's not all. You'll also get a brand new iPhone 16 and a £500 shopping voucher to spend at your favourite store. So why not be extra lucky this month? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 20th of February. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Shocking scenes from Gaza this morning as Hamas hands over the bodies of Israeli hostages for the first time as part of the ceasefire deal. Behind the coffins, a picture of the victims, with wording blaming the Israeli government for the deaths. We're speaking to a former advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes, and this comes as the BBC is forced to apologise for letting the son of a Hamas government minister narrate a prime-time documentary on the conflict. They've been accused of failing to carry out the most basic journalistic checks.
And elsewhere, we're speaking to a councillor in Surrey as reports emerge a second sinkhole has opened in the village of Godstone. What's going on? Are these sinkholes growing and multiplying? And when on earth can residents return home?
And it's revealed that comedy shows are set to be prescribed by the NHS for patients struggling with mental health conditions. We're asking, is comedy the best medicine, or has the NHS become a laughing stock?
Elsewhere, we should mention, of course, the Reform Party has changed its structure today. In the last hour or so, it's been announced, it's been updated on the Companies House website, no less. No longer a company limited by shares, majority owned by Nigel Farage. Now a non-profit, a more regular structure for a political party.
And this is what a lot of people have been asking for, isn't it? Within the party and supporters of the party saying, you know, this can't just be all owned by one person. It needs to be democratised and things like that. So we're getting stuck into that with our political editor and others as well. But also a question for the Reform Party. They've so far been accused of being pretty much silent on the issue of Trump and Ukraine and Zelensky. And of course, Trump has said some very controversial things in the last couple of days about the negotiations, about how he sees President Zelensky over in Ukraine, the amount of discussions he's had with Vladimir Putin. Do they need to make clear their position on everything? The Tories have, Labour has. Do they need to too? They're 27 points. They're the biggest party in terms of the polling at the moment.
That's true. But of course, Donald Trump seemed to suggest this week that Ukraine started the war, a bizarre position which is supported, according to a YouGov poll, by just 3% of people in Britain. If Reform attach themselves to that sort of thinking, might their polling go down? Of course, Nigel hasn't been able to speak about this yet. He's flying over to the United States today, but that in itself creates a bit of a problem.
Well,
I mean, speaking in the United States on this issue.
Maybe they want to speak to Trump first, find out what's going on, and then put forward a position. I don't know. gbnews.com/your say. Let us know your thoughts, but it's the headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 12 o'clock. These are your headlines. Sir Keir Starmer has defended Ukraine's President Zelensky, calling him a democratically elected leader after President Trump called him a dictator. A Downing Street spokesperson said the Prime Minister called Mr Zelensky last night to offer his support. He also added that it was perfectly reasonable to suspend elections during wartime, as the UK did during World War II. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch said Mr Zelensky is not a dictator. He is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine who bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion. But the US president has been speaking overnight at an investment forum in Miami, where he took aim at President Zelensky again and Europe's handling of the war.
President Zelensky talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I don't know what's the problem, but he hasn't been able. He's very upset. He's been working for 3 years. There's never been even meetings or phone calls to stop this war. It's a horrible thing. He refuses to have elections. Is low in the real Ukrainian polls. I mean, how can you be high with every city is being demolished? It's hard to be high. Somebody said, oh, no, his polls are good. Give me a break.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel told GB News Trump's comments are clearly not right, but she did say Europe must step up.
What I don't think we should be surprised about, though, are President Trump's overall remarks about the rest of Europe, including NATO allies, when it comes to defence and security. This war and conflict is the most brutal conflict on our continent since the Second World War, and that's why it's vital, it's urgent and it's essential that Britain leads the way, it steps up on defence spending, and at the same time it does what we did throughout the Ukraine conflict. We persuade our European allies and also our NATO allies to raise the bar when it comes to defence, security and military support.
Meanwhile, Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy said we must stick together in the face of Russian aggression.
The Prime Minister has been clear that all of our European allies and the UK have to increase defence spending, but we need to stick together with our NATO allies. The one thing we cannot afford to allow to happen is for us to be divided in the face of Russian aggression. That's why the Prime Minister was with European leaders over the weekend. It's why he spoke to President Zelensky to reaffirm our support for Ukraine last night. And it's why he's flying to Washington next week to meet President Trump.
Rachel Reeves is hosting another roundtable at Downing Street with leading bankers and asset managers today to discuss ways to boost the UK's economic growth after pledging to go further and faster. It comes as it's reported the Chancellor is considering cuts to the tax-free limit on cash ISAs, down from $20,000 to $4,000 a year. The meeting also comes off the back of inflation figures hitting a 10-month high, rising to 3%. Israel says the coffins of 4 Israeli hostages have now been transported to the country. Earlier, Hamas handed over the bodies, including that of 2 of the youngest, held by the terror group since being taken alive in the October 7th attack. It includes a mother and 2 children from the Bibas family, whose youngest child was just a 9-month-old baby. Hamas says the 4th body is that of 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the heart of the entire nation is torn, adding that Israel was dealing with monsters. Meanwhile, 6 living hostages are due to be freed on Saturday. Detectives investigating the Valentine's Day murder of a woman at a Kent pub believe the suspect has died after falling into the River Thames. 43-year-old Lisa Smith was killed after she was shot outside a pub in Main Road. A car driven by a man known to Lisa was found later that evening by officers abandoned on the Queen Elizabeth II Bridge. A handgun was found inside the vehicle, and inquiries have since established the suspect had entered the water below. And the Culture Secretary will question BBC bosses about a documentary on Gaza that was narrated by the son of a Hamas official. The broadcaster has been criticised for Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, which centred on a 13-year-old boy who is the son of Hamas's Deputy Minister of Agriculture. Speaking to media today, Lisa Nandy said she would discuss the matter with the BBC's Director General and Chairman. The BBC has since said it had not been informed of the family connection in advance by the film's production company and has apologised for the omission of that detail. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past midday now. Our hearts lie in tatters. Those were the words of Israel's President Isaac Herzog after Hamas returned the bodies of 4 hostages, including those of 2 children.
One of the coffins was handed over, as you can hear hundreds, if not thousands, of people there seemingly celebrating as these coffins handed over to the Red Cross, who will then return them to Israel. What's there to say, really, about those images, Tom?
Yeah, it seems like a festival-type atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly that.
Sick festival. Well, 3 of the bodies are those of 32-year-old Shiri Bibas and her 2 sons, Ariel and Kavir, who were just 4 years and 9 months old.
Yes, Hamas say the 4th body is that of 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz.
Well, the Red Cross convoy carrying the coffins entered Israel just a couple of hours ago.
OK, well, let's go live to Tel Aviv now and speak to former advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, Daniel Rubenstein. Daniel, a lot of people over in this country waking up to these images, seemingly a celebration as these 4 coffins are handed back to the Red Cross to be returned to Israel.
It's a very painful day in Israel, but it brings some degree of closure to what happened on October the 7th of 2023, when thousands of terrorists from Gaza invaded Israel, massacred 1,200 people, went house to house and took 251 hostages. Today, we saw the return of 4 of those hostages in coffins. 3 of the hostages were from the Bibas family. Shiri Bibas, a mother, her young boy, Ariel, 4 years old, and Kfir was a baby, just 9 months old when he was taken hostage. We hoped and prayed that they remained alive, but they were not. Hamas took them, Hamas murdered them. Hamas held their bodies so that Hamas could wait to receive a ransom payment in exchange for the return of this family, this mother and 2 young children. And also we saw the return today in a coffin of Oded Lifshitz, who was a peace activist who, before the war, was helping Palestinian children in Gaza reach hospitals in Israel for treatment. He was returned in a coffin, and we're just stunned by these images. And we're dealing with a very sadistic, horrific, psychopathic, terrorist government of Gaza. Hamas is the government of Gaza. We need to see a solution where Hamas is not the government of Gaza. I hope that will be the case, but it seems very difficult to reach there. Today, we're focused on mourning our loved ones.
It's just, there are no words to describe the images we're seeing on our screens right now. The spectacle that's being made of this. I know that people on the Israeli side were asking, pleading, that this handover were done in private, without the grotesque and anti-Semitic imagery that we see blazoned up there behind the coffin. The Israeli Prime Minister there depicted with fangs in his mouth and blood around his face. I mean, just extraordinary images. I find it hard to understand why Hamas as an organisation is playing these images out to the world. Surely they know how evil this looks.
I also have trouble finding the words, and it is my job to find the words, but I'm watching the same images that you're seeing today and describing, and I find it difficult to understand, to process how this could be possible, that Hamas would not just want to turn over the coffins of these dead hostages in a quiet and subdued manner, but instead has made a parade and a spectacle out of this process. Hamas, we must remember, is also a political movement. Its audience is also domestic. It is sending a message to the Palestinian public, many of whom are Hamas supporters, that our way actually brought results, that our way caused harm to Israel, that our way led to political concessions, and our way is seeing the release of hundreds of convicted Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prisons in exchange for some hostages living and dead. So it's very difficult scenes, but it's a reminder of the struggle that we face. It's a struggle not just against Israel, but really all of humanity. I don't know of any civilized people that would do such a thing, to take a mother and her babies and to hold them for more than 500 days and to return them in some proud spectacle. There's really nothing much to say besides to look at it and understand who we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, it's just despicable as a spectacle, a performance around the world now. But I just want to ask you, because there's been a lot of controversy in this country around a documentary that was released by the BBC recently. Now, the BBC has failed to call Hamas a terrorist organisation since the beginning of this war, even though they are prescribed in this country and have been for many years. But this particular documentary used the son of a Hamas figure, a minister in Hamas, a Hamas terrorist, as the subject, as the narrator of this prime-time documentary. Now, this has been pointed out to the BBC, and they've issued an apology. But on the week that we see this spectacle, this hideous spectacle in Gaza, do you believe that the BBC should take down this documentary?
I believe that this documentary should be left up as a museum piece for how journalism works in Gaza. I think there are some things that people need to understand about how things work in Gaza. Hamas is the government of Gaza, and it has been the government of Gaza since 2007. And Hamas governs Gaza as if it is a mafia. If outside journalists would like to have access to Gaza, it's a very difficult thing to do without going through Hamas in some way, shape, or form, whether you realize it or not. The fact that the BBC was able to gain access to a 14-year-old child who was able to narrate a story that is supposedly about the realities of ordinary daily life for people in Gaza, it turns out that this is not the case because Hamas managed to present a teenage boy who was the son of a deputy minister in the Hamas government. It's not surprising to me at all that this is how things work. I think all Western journalists should be aware of how journalism is done in Gaza. There is, in effect, no journalism in Gaza. When you hear about Palestinian journalists in Gaza, you're hearing about people who are operating with the full permission and coordination of the Hamas government. There are no examples of Palestinian journalists in Gaza who are publishing information that is embarrassing to the Hamas government. I think if you want to be a journalist, you need to speak truth to power. There is no one in Gaza who is speaking truth to power, no one who's allowed to speak truth to power. And this is the dynamic that foreign journalists are operating in when they want to get a story out of Gaza. The game is rigged in advance, and we must be aware of it.
I think that's absolutely well said, Daniel. But could Israel not help global journalists here? Because there are crossings into Gaza that are controlled by Israel. Currently, journalists are not allowed to go in, perhaps for journalist safety, for whatever other reason that Israel has decided that. But would it not make more sense to allow in foreign journalists so that the networks that are run and influenced by Hamas within Gaza aren't the only means of getting information out there?
There's a discussion to be had about whether or not Israel should be allowing foreign journalists into Gaza. Right now, they have not been allowed in for their own safety and due to the fact that there is an ongoing war and they could be reporting on Israeli troop movements and such. But we had a reality since 2007 until this war started where foreign journalists were allowed into Gaza. Once they are allowed into Gaza, even if Israel allows foreign journalists into Gaza today, those foreign journalists will be entering a Hamas-controlled territory. So there's not much that the state of Israel can do to help these journalists get good information once they're inside Gaza, because they will be operating completely under the authority and the watchful eye of Hamas, which remains the government of Gaza. I hope we will have a solution to the problem of Gaza that does not see the Hamas government as the government of Gaza, and that it'll be replaced with a government that chooses to live in peace and have open criticism and allows journalism. But at the moment, any journalist that Israel allows into Gaza will be operating under the authority of the Hamas government once they cross the border.
OK, well, Daniel Rubenstein, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show today, former advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Thank you.
Right, we're going to get some more now on that BBC scandal. Well, is it a scandal? Joining us now is the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. Peter, we heard the words there of the former advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu saying actually he thinks that BBC should keep it up as a sort of warning sign because clearly it was a mistake to get the son of a government figure from Hamas to narrate this documentary.
Well, first of all, let me say that I have opposed Hamas ever since its formation. It is an Islamist, anti-Semitic terrorist organization. It's homophobic, it's sexist. It doesn't allow any freedom for Palestinians in Gaza. It persecutes its own Palestinian people. It is the enemy of democracy and human rights. With regard to this particular video, the BBC has rightly apologized, and they've added text to the video to make it clear who the young boy is. However, having said that, he is narrating the experiences of children in Gaza. His documentary does not support Hamas or excuse Hamas in any way. It's simply about the suffering of Palestinian kids in Gaza. And that, I think, is the legitimate thing to say. And it mirrors the BBC reports, which also had previously Jewish children in Israel reporting about their suffering as a result of Hamas attacks, and in particular, the 7th of October massacre. Those Jewish children, some of them were sons and daughters of Israeli officials and military people. They were not talking about Israel's policy just like this young boy was not talking about Hamas's policy. They were simply telling their stories of the suffering they'd endured. So I think under those circumstances, yes, the documentary should remain with the annotation that this young boy is the son of this Hamas official.
What, and then we expect it, and then we just accept it as an unbiased documentary. I mean, what does this say about the BBC? They say they didn't check. They didn't look into it. They didn't look into who this boy was, what his connection was to Hamas, the terrorist organisation. I mean, surely it's an appalling show of journalism.
Oh, yeah, that was a mistake, undoubtedly.
It's a huge mistake, Peter.
I'm glad the BBC have corrected it, but it's that documentary is not Hamas propaganda. It's telling the suffering of Palestinian children in the same way that Jewish children told in documentaries their suffering at the hands of Hamas and other terrorists. It's just about the suffering of children. It's not about Hamas propaganda at all.
And yet the BBC seemingly has sort of opened up that door to criticism because of this terrible oversight, I suppose, in the production of the film. Perhaps it would be a more reliable piece of journalism had they done their homework, go back, reshoot, re-edit. Is that not a possibility here?
Well, that, of course, would have been desirable from the outset, but no one has suggested that there's anything untrue in that documentary. The documentary is factual. It's been fact-checked by the BBC and others, and no one, not even Israelis, dispute the allegations, the claims, the evidence, the stories told in that documentary.
But Peter, the BBC won't even call Hamas a terrorist organisation. So how on earth can we trust the BBC when it comes to fact-checking this documentary when they didn't even know, apparently, although I don't know if we believe that, didn't even know that this boy who's narrating the thing is a relative, is the son of a Hamas minister? I mean...
I have to correct you there. The BBC does say that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. It does. Many times.
No, it doesn't.
I've seen BBC News and others where they always say...
It's an editorial choice,
Hamas,
is it not?
They say Hamas, which is a proscribed terrorist organisation.
I don't believe that to be true. It's been a huge controversy that they do not.
I've seen it many times.
OK, but to the point of the...
The BBC has reported on Hamas terrorism. It's done great investigative reports showing the terrible terrorist crimes of Hamas. It has not pulled any punches. In fact, many people say it is, hasn't given the Israeli war crimes the same coverage. But, fair enough. It is true that the BBC has exposed Hamas many times as a terrorist, anti-Semitic organisation, and quite right.
I think where the disagreement here might be coming is that very often the BBC will explain that the British government has prescribed Hamas as a terrorist organisation, but then when referring to individual, when they refer to individual people from Hamas, sometimes they say Hamas fighters rather than Hamas terrorists, and I think that sometimes that can come across as being inappropriate. But we'll have to leave it there. Peter Tatchell, thanks so much for coming on and putting across your point of view. It's a really thorny issue. OK, a BBC spokesperson has said... I'm sorry, is it the BBC suddenly... Oh, we didn't know. I'm sorry, if you'd done any due diligence, you would have known that. Why say sorry now? Why say sorry now? Anyway, the narrator of this film, this is the BBC spokesperson, the narrator of this film is 13-year-old Abdullah. His father has worked as a deputy agricultural minister for the Hamas-run government in Gaza. The production team had full editorial control of filming with Abdullah, and we followed all of our usual compliance procedures in the making of this film. We had not been informed of this information by the independent producers when we complied and then broadcast the finished film. It still remains a powerful child's eye view of the devastating consequences of the war in Gaza. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more coming up on today's programme. Indeed, stand-up comedy shows, yes, stand-up comedy shows set to be prescribed by the NHS for patients suffering with mental health conditions. Well, is comedy the best medicine, or has the NHS become a bit of a laughingstock?
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is GB News.
Britain's news channel.
And fashionistas are keen to see which new trends are set to hit the catwalk.
Well, our next guest is very well placed to share her predictions with us after being a contestant on hit ITV series Dress the Nation, as well as being an upcycling and sewing consultant.
Wow. Joining us now is Tendai Murewe. I want to go back to you appearing on the ITV Dress the Nation.
Right.
Tell us about that experience. What was that like?
Oh, that was one of my highlights as a upcycling consultant. I learned to sew in my kitchen 5 years ago. And then, during COVID, just making masks. Then the next thing I was on a Dress the Nation, making dresses in front of TV. Yeah, it was just incredible. I think we all had all these clothes that we have, but we don't know what to do with them. So mainly I started with men's jackets, taking off the sleeves and putting it like a print on.
I've tried this. I've tried taking off my sleeves before. I now have about 3 jackets with no sleeves. I never managed to put them back on.
You need to come to a workshop.
You
need to come to a workshop.
I need an upcycling consultant. 2025. What can we expect, fashion-wise?
I think bold prints are back. People are loving. I think you walk on the streets in frollals and oversized men's jackets.
So the exact opposite. We have drastically underperformed this morning. You're just saying not like us.
We just woke up this morning and thought it's winter, it's cold, it's grey.
Grey, miserable.
Is that not the way to go?
No, it is. It's still, I think because fashion is expressive. It's whatever you want to express yourself.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past midday. Now, is laughter, or indeed laughter, you can laugh at my pronunciation of that if you like, is laughter really the best medicine?
I don't know, is it? Comedy shows are set to be prescribed by the NHS for patients struggling with mental health conditions, and the tech company Crake Health is running the trial.
Well, it includes stand-up shows and improv workshops in a bid to get people laughing again. It comes as figures show 8.7 million people in England took antidepressants in 2023 to the end of 2024. So, should we ditch the pills and simply laugh it off?
Laugh it off to shake it off. Let's get more with our science and health editor, Lucy Johnston. Lucy, it seems obvious to me that a bit of laughter might help you with some depression.
Absolutely, and there is good studies, good evidence to show that laughter reduces your cortisol levels, improves your immune system, it improves the feel-good factors in your brain, and it's a fantastic way to get together and be part of a community, which we've also lost in sort of recent decades. There is a whole movement towards what's known as social prescribing, which has been pushed an all-party parliamentary group called Beyond Pills, which has recognised that many of the drugs we take, in fact, the government has done research showing 10% of the drugs that we're given are not necessary, probably could be harmful. And in terms of antidepressants, we've had a doubling of antidepressant use over the last 12 years. So we now 1 in 5 of adults is taking antidepressants or has had a prescription for antidepressants, and tens of thousands of children, and they carry on using them. So that's not really fixing the problem. We're taking more of these drugs, and government has recognised and is now mandating GPs to offer we're calling social prescriptions, which are gardening, they could be art classes, and in this case, it's comedy. So I think it's all part of a wide movement, and I think it's recognizing that we do need to move away from this pandemic of drugs, because they're not always helping us.
It does seem extraordinary, actually, just how medicalised we're becoming as a society. Perhaps we're 10 or 20 years behind the United States in this way. I know that a huge proportion of people in the United States are in therapy and are taking antidepressants almost as a matter of course. I mean, frankly, do we need to be seeing the GP so much about all of this? Should we just be watching a bit more comedy in all of our lives to stave this stuff off? Doing a bit more gardening, touching some more grass, all the rest of it?
Well, I mean, I think it's meant to be. I think 1 in 5 people who go to the GP because of what they call social determinants of health, and it could be even be more than that. So it depends on what your problem is. But the GPs are overwhelmed, and they're overwhelmed with people that have cost of living problems. They have benefit problems. They have problems with the law. They're lonely. It's a huge number of things. And our communities, we don't have so many people going to churches anymore. We don't have the old village elders. We don't have community structures like we used to. And I think that is part of the problems, and the GPs get to see that, but their job is to prescribe and to do medical interventions, and they're just not set up for helping with all of this. So I think perhaps people can't self-start and just say, well, I'm just going to go in the garden and that will fix me. But I think we need a whole movement and a radical approach, radical change approach to medicine, because just giving people more pills is not doing it.
To look after each other a bit more, it sounds like, Lucy. Lucy, thank you so much. Lucy Johnston, our Science and Health Editor here at GBNews. Interested to know what you do to stave off the old depression.
Yes, well, what I actually am going to do is I'm going to take your pad here. I'm just going to write down... Hang on, 1 second.
I don't know what you're doing either.
One prescription to watch Headliners tonight at 11 o'clock in the evening.
Do you know what? I listen to a lot of comedy, actually. The non-woke comedy, that just winds me up. But comedy, particularly about relationships and dating and that sort of thing. And it does lift my spirits.
Yeah.
I think the best thing is to get out and about and speak to people.
They say if you smile more, you feel better as well. So lots more coming up on today's show. But just now, some breaking news. Spain's High Court has found former football head coach Rubiales guilty of kissing player Jenny Hermoso without consent.
Wow, he's been found guilty. Now, that was a big controversy. We'll bring you more as we get it on that one. But we'll get to the headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Your headlines at 12:31. Sir Keir Starmer has defended Ukraine's President Zelensky, calling him a democratically elected leader after President Trump called him a dictator. A Downing Street spokesman said the Prime Minister called Zelensky last night to offer his support. He also added that it was perfectly reasonable to suspend elections during wartime, as the UK did during World War II. Meanwhile, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch said Mr Zelensky is not a dictator. He is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine who bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion. But the US president has been speaking overnight at an investment forum in Miami, where he took aim at President Zelensky again and Europe's handling of the war. Meanwhile, Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel told GBNews Trump's comments are clearly not right, but she did say Europe must step up.
What I don't think we should be surprised about, though, are President Trump's overall remarks about the rest of Europe, including NATO allies, when it comes to defence and security. This war and conflict is the most brutal conflict on our continent since the Second World War. And that's why it's vital, it's urgent and it's essential that Britain leads the way, it steps up on defence spending, and at the same time it does what we did throughout the Ukraine conflict. We persuade our European allies and also our NATO allies to raise the bar when it comes to defence, security and military support.
In other news, Israel says the coffins of 4 Israeli hostages have now been transported back to the country. Earlier, Hamas handed over the bodies, including the 2 youngest held by the terror group since being taken alive in the October 7th attack. It includes a mother and 2 children from the Bibas family, whose youngest child was just a 9-month-old baby. Hamas says the 4th body is that of 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the heart of the entire nation is torn, adding that Israel was dealing with monsters. Meanwhile, 6 living hostages are due to be free on Saturday. Detectives investigating the Valentine's Day murder of a woman at a Kent pub believe the suspect has died after falling into the River Thames. 43-year-old Lisa Smith was killed after she was shot outside a pub in Main Road. A car driven by a man known to Lisa was found later that evening by officers abandoned on the Queen Elizabeth II bridge. A handgun was found inside the vehicle, and inquiries have since established the suspect had entered the water below. Now to that breaking news. Spain's court has sentenced Rubiales to pay a fine worth over €10,000. He was found to be guilty of kissing the player Jenny Hermosa without her consent. We'll bring you more as we get it. Those are the...
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2615 and €1.2084. The price of gold is £2,332 and 64 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,680 points.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In Aberdeenshire, the A981 is closed in both directions south of Fraserburgh after a car hit a lamppost. There are delays of up to 4 hours to P&O Irish Sea sailings between Cairnryan and Larne, up to an hour and a half to Stena Line sailings between Cairnryan and Belfast because of poor weather conditions. In Cumbria, the A591 is closed each way between Windermere and Ambleside after an accident causing queues. In West Yorkshire, the A644 is closed westbound from the A62 at the Cooper Bridge roundabout to junction 25 of the M62 at Brighouse because of an accident causing queues. In Pembrokeshire, the A477 is closed in both directions at Sentry Cross after an accident causing queues. And in London on the A13, there are 2 lanes closed westbound along with the exit at Movers Lane Barking because of a burst water main, with queues from the Goresbrook interchange at Dagenham.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it?
Because you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 20 to 1. Now, hugely dramatic scenes in Surrey yesterday as a massive sinkhole forced people from their homes. Well, now reports have emerged that a second sinkhole has also appeared as residents are left unable to return home.
Yes, so the original sinkhole first appeared in Godstone on Monday evening and soon swallowed up large parts of the road, measuring a whopping 19 metres in length. And it certainly was a surprise to residents.
Well, let's speak to Councillor Mike Crane from the Residents' Alliance in Godstone. Mike, thanks so much for being with us today. I mean, this is an astonishing story, and I know how astonishing this is because I was hanging out with some people last night who don't normally listen to the news. The only thing we were talking about is the Surrey sinkhole.
With everything else going on in the world, that's quite something, isn't it?
It is quite something, but it tells you people care about these random events, and also they wonder what the impact is on the residents.
Well, the impact has been very significant on those residents immediately in the locality of the sinkhole. Approximately 32, I think it is, families have had to be evacuated from their homes. This happened in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Unfortunately, many of them were blissfully unaware of what was happening, and they just got a knock on the door in the 2 o'clock in the morning to say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to evacuate your property. And obviously that was a source of some significant concern to them. Since then, they've not been allowed back into their properties. The water has been restored into, I think it's now most of the properties affected. It has been established there are no gas or electric issues, but the hole itself and the problems that could potentially cause to surrounding properties has been the reason why a lot of residents haven't been allowed back into their homes. I do understand that in either today or tomorrow, those affected residents will be allowed back in under supervision to collect any valuables or necessary things they need, things like medication, I guess.
That must be incredibly concerning for the local community. Frankly, I don't want to bring up any more sort of trauma for people, but we saw what happened with the exclusion zones in California when the wildfires hit. There were people who went and burgled the houses. This must be at the forefront of some local residents' concerns. If all of these houses are abandoned by order of authorities, it must be a prime target for burglars. But equally, just the idea that you can only go back into your own property that you own, and we know an Englishman's house is a castle, if you can only go on there sort of being accompanied or escorted by an official, I mean, this is serious stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, as far as robbery is concerned, I don't think that is an issue. There is 24-hour security on site. The only reason they're being escorted is for safety, not there's nothing more sinister than that. It's purely a safety consideration because, you know, there is still a risk to some of those properties.
Well, yeah, and Mike, I've been just looking at the history of sinkholes in Surrey, and they are very rare. But apparently there was one in 2015 in Guildford, which most people will know in Surrey. A sinkhole led to some road closures and things. Doesn't seem as though it was as big as this one, and certainly not as close to a housing as this one. And apparently many years ago, a whole mature oak tree disappeared into the ground. So there you go. Surrey does have a history of sinkholes, even though they're, you know, there's many a year between each.
It does. Well, from what you're saying, it does seem that way. What I would also point out is that under Godstone, there is a network of caves which have been there for several hundred years. They were used to quarry stone, sand, and other minerals. In fact, lots of the older buildings in London were constructed from what is called Godstone Greystone, which was mined from those areas. Those caves tend to be between 80 and 200 feet under the ground, and to date haven't caused too much trouble. So, you know, everybody's looking into what the cause of this is. It's not worth speculating until we get full engineers' reports. Some people are saying it's caused by water leaks, which have eroded some of those caves. Others maintain it's the movement of heavy goods vehicles. It could well be a combination of all of them, but I'm not.
Well, hopefully it's not anyone in particular's fault, but perhaps it is. Perhaps someone will be held accountable for this.
Clearly it's London's fault.
It's our fault here.
As if the rest of the country doesn't hate London enough. Now all the buildings that were built 300 years ago are causing sinkholes in Surrey.
Blame it on the capital. Councillor Mike Crane, thank you very much indeed. You're from the Residents Alliance, Godstone. Good luck to the residents impacted by all of this. It's kind of dramatic, isn't it? You don't expect that in leafy Surrey.
You don't, but thankfully no one's been hurt, and let's hope it can stay that way.
Yes, well, if you're in search of some winter sun elsewhere in the world, here's the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello, if you're looking for any winter sun, it's going to be wet as we end the week in Portugal, fine in Italy, unusually cold in Greece. Through the Greek islands, we've got this northerly wind blowing, 6 Celsius in Athens, just 7 for Mykonos, that's 8 degrees lower than average. But for Italy, mostly fine with sunny spells, although for Portugal, we've got a spell of rain moving in, and as that crosses Iberia, that's going to turn to showers at the weekend, whilst temperatures gradually recover in Greece.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Stay with us, plenty more coming in today's programme. Indeed, we're talking about the so-called tolerant left, as a new study finds so-called progressive activists in Britain are far less likely to want to work with their political opponents.
Hello, yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's turned a lot milder, but it's also turned wet and windy, and many of us will have a pretty soggy and blustery couple of days. Thanks to low pressure systems and their weather fronts which have been marching in. Look at the number of isobars across the UK. It is gusty, particularly close to these bands of rain, one of which bringing some heavy downpours across western Scotland, North Wales through the lunchtime period, then into northwest England, southern Scotland, some hailstones mixed in with the heavy rain and gusty winds. Spells of rain too across the southeast, something a bit drier elsewhere, and it may brighten up a little bit in a few places, and if it does, could see temperatures 14-15 degrees. It is mild, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily feel that mild, particularly with the wind and the rain. Still some heavy bursts of rain crossing northern England through this evening's rush hour, and still some lively showers moving across Scotland also, but some decent clear spells, and overall it will be turning drier as we go through this evening, certainly for much of Northern Ireland. Still quite breezy, however. The heavy downpour should be easing from northern England by about 7, 8 o'clock, and the rain also clearing through the late evening from parts of Kent, which will leave many places dry for a time, but down to the southwest more rain starts to gather, and that moves in through the early hours. Again, some bright colours there, some heavy downpours, particularly for Wales, Northern Ireland, and spreading into Scotland. Look at the temperatures, a very mild night, many places staying in double digits. But the wind and the rain could cause some disruption during Friday. We've got warnings in place across West Wales, the east of Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and central Scotland, where the rain will persist. The warnings for wind and for rain. Much of eastern England having a dry day on Friday till that rain comes in through the evening time. And again, it will be very mild, just won't necessarily feel that way.
headliners on GB News 11 PM every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's headliners every night from 11 PM and 5 AM as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 PM every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 PM on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 1. And do stay with us, because shortly after 1 o'clock, we'll have Nigel Farage on this programme, speaking live from the United States. A lot to ask the Reform Party leader, and perhaps slightly relevant to this next story too. Let's talk about the tolerant, or perhaps not so tolerant left, because the study of one study has found so-called progressive activists in Britain are far less likely to want to work with political opponents than other groups.
Yeah, and they're more likely to think those holding different views have been misled. I sometimes think they think they're evil. Anyway, the news is rather timely because former Labour, now independent MP Zara Sultana has been making a lot of noise. She's been reported to the Parliamentary Standards Committee following this post on X of Nigel Farage, essentially wanting him banned from Birmingham, so it appears. She also compared Reform UK to the far right politics of the British National Party and the National Front. So is this an example of the tolerant left?
Let's speak now to the political strategist, John Oxley. John, first of all, with this sort of Zara Sultana protest, I mean, it is pretty bitter.
Absolutely. And, whatever you think of people's politics, where you have someone who is an elected representative, a leader, at least for the moment, of a political party that has seat in the House of Commons, it is somewhat outrageous to try and extend this level, not just protesting against them, but this idea that you should turn them away, that they shouldn't be welcome at all in the debate, is itself very intolerant, and is one of those things that makes our politics poorer, because the whole point of politics is that we all disagree, and the best way to do that is to engage with each other and debate the issues and see who the public prefers. And so turning people away from the debate is not the way we want to go.
Also, I mean, Nigel Farage's party at the moment are the top party in terms of poll ratings at the moment. 27, the latest YouGov poll, putting them ahead of both the Labour Party and the Conservatives. Is Zara Sultana essentially saying that, supporters of reform are beyond the pale? They're not welcome in her constituency as well? Because if I saw that and I was one of her constituents, I'd probably think that.
That's exactly how a lot of people will see the message. And it's not a good way of thinking about politics. There are certain ideologies that I think we would all say are beyond the mainstream and that we shouldn't accept. But I think you're getting very narrow if you're saying reform, which, as you say, is polling particularly well, already has representation in the House of Commons, is outside of that. And, really, are they that much more extreme than some of the most left-wing figures in the House of Commons in their own direction, like Zara Sultana? And if Nigel Farage were making the same gestures about her, she would no doubt be outraged and say it is an insult both to her and her politics and to those people who do support her.
That's a very fair point. Now, you mentioned Nigel Farage. We're going to be speaking to the man himself in around 15 minutes' time. And, John, this is a really crucial moment, I think, for Reform UK, as, of course, they're leading in many polls at the moment. But there's a moment of jeopardy with regards to their position on Ukraine. Obviously, they're quite close to Donald Trump, who's made more and more, what the average Brit would see as an extreme statement on the situation in Ukraine. This is a tightrope for the Reform Party to walk.
Yes, it is. The Reform, and particularly Nigel Farage, have been very close, very supportive of Donald Trump, who is going in a direction that virtually all British people, whether right or left, disagree with. And that's going to be very tricky for them because, you know, the big question everyone's saying is, can they keep up this performance in the polls? Can they go beyond being a sort of protest party that some have seen them as? Can they become a vehicle that is bigger than Nigel Farage? And, you know, this issue has really thrown it into the spotlight. And these changes look like, you know, Reform have realised that, and they're thinking about how do we make this a long-term, more sustainable party.
Well, John Oxley, thank you very much indeed for your time, political strategist. Thank you. Yes, we will be speaking to Nigel Farage very soon indeed. Perhaps he'll break his silence on what he thinks about recent comments by Donald Trump regarding President Zelensky, mostly.
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake for a political party in this country to sort of almost entirely attach its fortunes to things it can't control, like the whims of a foreign president. But goodness me, lots to discuss after the weather.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's turned a lot milder, but it's also turned wet and windy, and many of us will have a pretty soggy and blustery couple of days, thanks to low pressure systems and their weather fronts which have been marching in. Look at the number of isobars across the UK. It is gusty, particularly close to these bands of rain, one of which bringing some heavy downpours across western Scotland, North Wales through the lunchtime period, then into northwest England, southern Scotland, some hailstones mixed in with the heavy rain and gusty winds. Spells of rain too across the southeast, something a bit drier elsewhere, and it may brighten up a little bit in a few places, and if it does, we could see temperatures 14-15 degrees. It is mild, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily feel that mild, particularly with the wind and the rain. Still some heavy bursts of rain crossing northern England through this evening's rush hour, and still some lively showers moving across Scotland also, but some decent clear spells, and overall it will be turning drier as we go through this evening, certainly for much of Northern Ireland. Still quite breezy, however. The heavy downpour should be easing from northern England by about 7, 8 o'clock, and the rain also clearing through the late evening from parts of Kent, which will leave many places dry for a time, but down to the southwest more rain starts to gather, and that moves in through the early hours. Again, some bright colours there, some heavy downpours, particularly for Wales, Northern Ireland, and spreading into Scotland. Look at the temperatures, a very mild night, many places staying in double digits. But the wind and the rain could cause some disruption during Friday. We've got warnings in place across West Wales, the east of Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and central Scotland, where the rain will persist. The warnings for wind and for rain. Much of eastern England having a dry day on Friday till that rain comes in through the evening time. And again, it will be very mild, just won't necessarily feel that way.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be one of 2 lucky Great British giveaway winners? That's right, you could win one of 2 prize bundles, which includes a brand new iPhone 16, £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in your favourite store, and an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. What would you spend that cash on? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
One former Royal Marine has just set up a state-of-the-art new fitness brand which combines fitness, dating, clubbing. It's all in a very unique experience.
Yes, Will McLaren and co-founder Toby Spooner have managed to fuse well-being, dating and what they call community building in their new full-day event, Metrics, which also includes high-intensity workouts. Will and Toby are joining us now in the studio.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning, gents. Thank you for joining us. I'm very interested in this because all I seem to see at the minute is high rocks. But from what I've read about Metrics, this seems like the new upgraded version. What can you tell us about it? Tell our viewers all about Metrics.
Well, it is a fitness competition, but we are combining the music and production element. Also, we want it to be quite a social event as well. So we want people to come, meet each other and have a great day out.
So what does that actually mean? Tell us a little bit more in detail. Toby, just tell us a little bit about what's involved.
So, in short, it's an immersive fitness competition.
Yeah.
So you can do a partner workout, you can bring a friend, or we can actually make people. So we're getting that dating element.
Well, it was Valentine's yesterday.
Precisely.
So
Right.
is this going to be the new Tinder? People going along to Metrics and meeting their future partner?
Well, exactly that. So we've done a load of research into it, and what we've found is that exercise is slowly becoming more of a dating scene.
So is it, I assume, some behind the scenes of what Metrics will look like? Because it's still to start, isn't it? Is it big March it begins?
Yeah, so the 1st and 2nd of March, so it's in 2 weeks, at a magazine in North Greenwich.
We've known each other for a fair while, but we kind of put our heads together. So we've worked in fitness for years, and we found that music really drives performance. And people love music. People will come to our classes, they'll come away and they'll say, music was so good. And it just elevates the experience. We said, how can we put this on a scale, tenfold?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 20th of February. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Well, we're going to be joined by Reform UK leader Nigel Farage live from Washington, D.C. with some breaking news and also his verdict on the Ukraine situation.
Elsewhere, the BBC is forced to apologise for letting the son of a Hamas government minister narrate a primetime documentary on the conflict in Gaza. They've been accused of failing to carry out the most basic journalistic standards.
And it's revealed that comedy shows are set to be prescribed by the NHS for patients struggling with mental health conditions. Well, we're asking, is comedy the best medicine, or has the NHS become a laughingstock?
Well, whilst the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is jetting off to Washington, D.C. next week, this week, some others are in town, including former Prime Minister Liz Truss and current UK Reform Party leader Nigel Farage.
Yes, the bigwig Conservatives from around the world are descending on Washington, aren't they, to have their say. There's going to be many speeches. Nigel Farage will be giving a speech, of course. But we're going to have Nigel on very shortly. And I think it's about time we heard exactly what he thought about what Donald Trump's been saying about President Zelensky, calling him a dictator, suggesting that he may have caused this war himself, that he needs to hold an election as soon as possible.
Now, this is significant because I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump's rhetoric has turned up the heat in the last 48 hours. To be fair to Nigel Farage, he has been flying over to Washington, D.C. There has been a time difference. Many people have been asking, what is the Reform Party position? Well, today, on this programme, in just a few minutes' time, it seems we're going to be the first people to know. So do stay tuned for that, and indeed so much more throughout the rest of the show today. We also want your views and your comments. Do visit gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in all of those conversations. All to come, of course, after your latest headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Tom, Emily, thank you. It's just gone 1 o'clock. These are your headlines. Sir Keir Starmer has defended Ukraine's President Zelensky, calling him a democratically elected leader after President Trump called him a dictator. A Downing Street spokesman said the Prime Minister called Zelensky last night to offer his support. He also added that it was perfectly reasonable to suspend elections during wartime, as the UK did during World War II. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch said Mr Zelensky is not a dictator. He is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine who bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion. But the US president has been speaking overnight in Miami, where he took aim at President Zelensky again and Europe's handling of the war. Meanwhile, Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel told GB News Trump's comments are clearly not right, but she did say Europe must step up.
What I don't think we should be surprised about, though, are President Trump's overall remarks about the rest of Europe, including NATO allies, when it comes to defence and security. This war and conflict is the most brutal conflict on our continent since the Second World War, and that's why it's vital, it's urgent and it's essential that Britain leads the way, it steps up on defence spending, and at the same time it does what we did throughout the Ukraine conflict. We persuade our European allies and also our NATO allies to raise the bar when it comes to defence, security and military support.
Meanwhile, Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy said we must stick together in the face of Russian aggression.
The Prime Minister's been clear that all of our European allies and the UK have to increase defence spending, but we need to stick together with our NATO allies. The one thing we cannot afford to allow to happen is for us to be divided in the face of Russian aggression. That's why the Prime Minister was with European leaders over the weekend. It's why he spoke to President Zelensky to reaffirm our support for Ukraine last night. And it's why he's flying to Washington next week to meet President Trump.
In other news, Israel says the coffins of 4 Israeli hostages have now been transported back to their country. Earlier, Hamas handed over the bodies, including the 2 youngest held by the terror group since being taken alive in the October 7th attack. It includes a mother and 2 children from the Bibas family, whose youngest child was just a 9-month-old baby. Hamas says the 4th body is that of 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the heart of the entire nation is torn, adding that Israel was dealing with monsters. Meanwhile, 6 living hostages are due to be freed on Saturday. Now, some breaking news. A coroner has found on the balance of probabilities that a 19-year-old Royal Artillery gunner who was found hanged in her room was sexually assaulted by a colleague, and how this was handled played more than a minimal contributory part in her death. The Salisbury inquest heard Jaisley Beck died at Larkhill Camp in Wiltshire on December the 15th, 2021. And in July that year, she complained that she had been sexually assaulted by a senior colleague during a stay at Thorney Island. Battery Sergeant Major Michael Webber, now of Warrant Officer 2nd rank, was given a minor sanction for his actions. The inquest is still ongoing. Former Spanish football chief Luis Rubiales has been found guilty over kissing player Jenny Hermoso without consent after the Women's World Cup final in 2023. Rubiales has been ordered to pay a fine worth more than €10,000, but the Spanish High Court has acquitted him of coercion. Prosecutors had demanded a prison sentence for Rubiales. The ex-football chief grabbed Hermosa by the head and kissed her on the lips during the 2023 World Cup, which she said repeatedly was not consensual. And detectives investigating the Valentine's Day murder of a woman at a Kent pub believe the suspect has died after falling into the River Thames. 43-year-old Lisa Smith was shot outside a pub in Main Road. A car driven by a man known to Lisa was found later that evening by officers abandoned on the Queen Elizabeth II Bridge. A handgun was found inside the vehicle, and inquiries have since established the suspect had entered the water below. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 7 minutes past 1. A busy show this hour. Not only are we talking about things foreign affairs, domestic too. A changed Reform Party, speaking to Nigel Farage in just a few minutes' time. But for now, as the rift between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump deepens after the US president described his Ukrainian counterpart as a dictator, the Prime Minister has given Mr Zelensky his backing as a fellow democratically elected leader.
Yes, in a phone call yesterday, the Prime Minister also told the Ukrainian president it is perfectly reasonable for Ukraine to suspend elections during wartime, as the UK did during World War II.
For a decade? Well, even though Sir Keir Starmer's support will undoubtedly go down well in Kiev, what impact will it have on the Prime Minister's relationship with Donald Trump, the wider special relationship?
That's a good question. Let's get more on this with GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Yes, so Keir Starmer telling the Ukrainian president that he stands with him, that he agrees he is a democratically elected leader, not a dictator. What does this mean for next week's meeting with Donald Trump?
Yeah, hi Tom, hi Emily. Yeah, it sets up that meeting very, very nicely, I think, for what might happen next with this special relationship. The PM, of course, flying there next week with the first leader from Europe to have a proper meeting with a kind of press conference afterwards and all the other paraphernalia, which goes with a visit to the White House. But that statement last night from Number 10, I was watching so closely to see how it went. Of course, Kemi Badenoch came out very quickly and said that it was important to get behind Zelensky against Trump. I mean, you can say that in opposition, much harder when you're in charge of the UK government like Keir Starmer is. Now, he said last night, that the PM has spoken to Zelensky this evening and just need to work for everyone, and that he is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine. It seems an obvious thing to say, but that has been questioned by that dictator line from Donald Trump in that extraordinary statement on Truth Social, his own social media feed yesterday afternoon. Now we're waiting for what happens next with Reform UK. We're expecting Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, to speak on this issue within the next 10 or 15 minutes on GB News. He's been quite quiet over the past 12 hours or so, and others have noticed this. People like Andy Burnham, the Labour Mayor of Manchester, he said, where is reform on this issue? Even Tim Montgomery, of course, the lifelong Tory supporter, came across to Reform UK. He's wondering what will Farage say. Farage's problem, if it is such as it is he doesn't want to get too far away from public opinion, and the public opinion is pretty starkly in favour of Zelensky and against Trump and against Putin. A poll yesterday from YouGov found that three-quarters of us, 77% of us, think that Russia is entirely or mostly responsible for the war in Ukraine. 8% say they're equally in charge, and just 3% believe Ukraine is responsible. Now, Tom, on Twitter last night, you correctly said that is a very, very low number. 15% of Brits believe in the Loch Ness Monster, and 9% believe they talk to ghosts. So 3% is barely anyone in this country.
Yeah, I tried to find anything, actually, that matched the three. It's really hard to find anything that attracts as little as 3% support. Normally, there's, I don't want to go too cephalogical here, but there's this concept called the lizardman's constant in opinion polling. It's around 4 or 5%, and that's the percentage of people who will generally say the Queen is a lizard, or something ridiculous to that extent, because some people are genuinely bonkers or lie in a poll or want to do it as a joke. So to get below the lizard man constant is pretty impressive. The one thing I found, though, was the number of Brits who say they think the Earth is flat is 3%. So that's equivalent to those who say that Ukraine is responsible for the war.
And the reason why that matters politically is, what does Farage do? Does he come in and say, well, Trump's got a point, he might want to make a point about NATO expansionism, European Union expanding eastwards, that threatens Russia or something? That's what he might try and say. But that goes clearly against public opinion. And here's an individual who tells us he wants to be Prime Minister in 4 years' time. What will he do? What will he say? It's a big test for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's one polling question. And, of course, the vast, vast, vast majority of Brits do not believe that Ukraine is at fault for causing this war. But there may be differences, very major differences of opinion across the board on how we settle the war. So Nigel may well have something very interesting to say on that front, because that is more important.
Yeah. Exactly, and Trump comes from a position of wanting the killing to stop. We all agree with that. It's how that happens. Do you cede control of a large portion of Ukraine? How can you have a free elections in Ukraine if Russia have invaded a big chunk of it? For Reform UK, though, while we're talking about them, they have made some big news today. I would call it boring but important news in politics. Now, until yesterday, Reform UK was a company with 15 shares in it, 9 of them owned or controlled by Nigel Farage. That is ended today. They are now a fully fledged political party. It's been delayed since the announcement on GB News by Zia Youssef it was going to happen last summer. I understand there was lots of small loose ends to tie up, pension issues with the old structure. It was a company, and now it's actually formally an official party. That is a big moment. That means that people who join this party will have a degree, but not an entirely, but a degree of a say in how it's run, and even a form of a veto, albeit a small one, over who is leader. It makes the party much more democratic, and frankly, it has to be that if it has potential to be forming the next government in 2028, 2029, as we're told they want to, and the polls suggest they could be able to.
Now, this is significant. We now know there are over 200,000 members of Reform UK. That's certainly larger than the Conservative Party by membership numbers. It's approaching now on the membership of the Labour Party. I mean, if it grows at anywhere like the rate it's been growing over the last 6 months, it will be the largest political party by membership size in the country. Does Reform actually know who these members are? And frankly, given that Nigel Farage is giving up all of this control, that's a bit of a moment of trepidation, surely.
Yes, there are various locks on removing Farage as leader. I think they can put forward a motion and pass a motion as members, and then that goes to the board of the party, which votes again. So there's a couple of locks before you can actually remove a leader. But yeah, I mean, to me, it shows the party is growing up and very rapidly. Don't forget, this time last year, Nigel Farage was not even leader of Reform UK. He was a presenter of GB News, which he still is, of course. But the party is changing in real time, and they want to try and form a new government. But the question you may want to ask Nigel Farage is, who would be your work and pension secretary? Who would be your health secretary? Who would be your home secretary? These are questions we can't answer. They've got 5 MPs in Parliament. Normally, the next party that purports to be the next government has a front bench that you can look at and assess their capability. We have no idea who would hold those big jobs in a Reform government, and yet this party, judging by the polls, could form a new government or hold a balance of power and have influence over a Tory government if the polls are right.
Yeah, I wonder if Nigel Farage has given much thought to Zara Sultana's campaign against him and his party.
It'll have stung him that when Zara Sultana told GB News last night she compared it to the BNP or the National Front, that really would have hurt Farage. The one thing he talks about with passion is how UKIP's rise in prominence in 2010, 11, 12 killed off the BNP. Don't forget, in the 2000s, BNP had its own MEP. It took state money to be a party. That, as other countries in the European Union have a much stronger far right, we don't have a far right at all in this country because of, I think, of the way Farage neutralised that. He gave people who were concerned about immigration issues, rather than going towards the BNP, they went towards UKIP, and they're a much more respectable operation, of course, and that became the Brexit Party and now Reform UK. So Farage does believe he hasn't got the proper credit for that, Emily.
I mean, we will ask him himself, of course, but do you think he'll care what Zara Sultana has to say?
I think it's a good debate for them to have. They've got a big event coming up in Birmingham. I think that, and you're seeing now on screen the stop sign saying essentially Farage not welcome in Birmingham because there's a big event that day that Reform UK is organising. This kind of, you might argue that maybe the left want to have a bit of a demonstration against Reform UK stand against the left. It's a kind of, they may both want this. I don't know. I mean, there was certainly Zia Youssef, the party's chairman, saw that Twitter message there from Zara Sultana and sees that as a threat to the safety of Farage, which no one wants, of course. And I think that's how some people in that party have seen it. And that's why Lee Anderson has taken it to the Speaker of the House of Commons. There could be a meeting next week. Certainly the Speaker is now assessing it for a safety issue for Farage. And I think when you've got an MP who knows about safety issues doing something which could threaten Farage's safety, that is a very serious issue. So
that's true.
Putting the safety of the MPs to one side, having a debate, I think, between two parties on what is Reform UK is probably where Reform want to be anyway.
Yeah, no, big stuff. Well, Chris Hope, thanks indeed for joining us. We'll catch up with you a little bit later as all these stories develop. But for now, let's join the former Reform UK spokesman, Gawain Towler, because, Gawain, this is a big moment for the Reform Party. They had come under criticism for the party structure, a very unusual party structure up until today, but now moving from this limited company controlled almost exclusively by Nigel Farage to a more democratic structure.
Yes, I mean, it is a seminal moment in the development of Reform as a grown-up political party. It's great news. I'm delighted, and that it can only be a good thing for the party going forward.
And what does it mean in practice?
Well, it means in practice the party will be controlled by a board, 3 of whom will be elected from the membership. And so therefore there will be voices at the top table of the ordinary member. It means that ordinary members get to select the candidates that will stand for them in Westminster elections. As long as they've passed the vet, they will be able to vote for any candidate that puts themselves forward. It means that when Nigel stands down, there will be an election of the membership for the leadership of the party. There's a whole series of things that make a huge difference. And the constant, if you just go on Twitter, whenever I post something on Twitter, I get people saying, oh, it's a limited company. Oh, you're just putting in rubbish. That was a regular attack upon us. That attack. It isn't perfect, but nothing ever is. We don't want a Polish parliament. That would destroy all of capacity to move to act.
Your signal seems a little bit wobbly there. We're just going to pause for a second as your picture seems to have frozen.
He's paused anyway.
But this is, I think, a big moment. There will be some big questions. It does seem like the Reform Party is serious about its professionalisation. It is serious about this aim that I think if you were to talk to anyone, even 9 months ago, about what the Reform Party's ambitions are for the next general election, you might say, oh, getting into double figures in seats in the House of Commons. But you talk to people at the top of the Reform Party now, they're genuinely talking about forming the next government, which is an extraordinary level of ambition, but also speaks to the level of organisation, professionalisation, the local parties that are being set up around the country. This will be a real moment of contention in British electoral politics.
Yes, such a young party to poll on YouGov at 27 points, ahead of the Tories, ahead of Labour, is quite extraordinary without any of this.
And I suppose that's the big thing. At 27%, we're really looking, given the fractured nature of the electorate right now. You've got the Greens hovering around, 8 or 9, the Lib Dems hovering around 10 or 11, the Tories hovering around 21, 22, Labour 25, 26, Reform 27. I mean, it's such a spread. Well, I mean, yes, why not? Let's throw in the SNP, who are having a resurgence in Scotland. Let's throw in Plaid Cymru in Wales. Let's throw in, of course, the DUP and the SDLP and the
Quite interesting what's happening in Scotland, isn't it? They went for Labour and now don't like that. So back to the SNP.
But this could be a complete cauldron of parties at the next election, and actually some dealing afterwards and perhaps some coalition building.
OK, well, let's speak to Reform UK leader Nigel Farage himself, live from Washington. Nigel, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out of your day. We know you're an extremely busy man. Should we start with the changes to the Reform Party? The breaking news here that your party is going to change in its structure.
Yes, well, I tell you what, on the 5th of July last year, after the election, we won a handful of seats, we got over 4 million votes, and I said, the first speech I gave, I said that I would professionalise and democratise the party. And since that time, we've formed nearly 400 branches up and down the country. We've got a vetting system in place for candidates that I'll bet is more rigorous for local elections than it is for any of the other parties. We've produced a new constitution that was overwhelmingly passed at our annual party conference. And now the big one, as it was seen by many, the company, the structure in which I own 2/3 of the shares, I no longer do. Now this is a company limited by guarantee. Effectively, all of us in Reform own it. As of today, I don't own the company behind the party. And following on from that, we will now have a board with elected representation. And I think I can honestly say that we've turned it in a relatively short period of time into a fully functioning, democratic, modern political party.
There will be some people who say this isn't the direct democracy that perhaps a party you used to look towards, the Five-Star Movement in Italy used to champion. Only 3 members of the governing board will be elected. Of course, the Labour NEC is entirely elected. Is that a problem, or is that the right balance for a professional party?
You know, I had over 20 years of UKIP with a fully elected National Executive Committee and a party that in the end became completely and utterly and totally ungovernable. And so I think, you know, there has to be some degree of trust amongst the members in the leadership team, but ultimately, if they don't like what I'm doing, they now have means of removing me. So yeah, getting the balance right is very, very important. We want this to be a very professional political party. I think these are all the right steps. And hey, you know what? Promises made, promises kept.
So if the reformers turn against you, you can technically get the boot now, Nigel. But Nigel, the country is waiting with bated breath to find out what you think about what Donald Trump has been saying recently about Ukraine, particularly the President Zelensky, calling him a dictator, suggesting that it was he who started the war. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I've been on an aeroplane, and here we are. It's first thing in the morning in Washington, hence the delay. You should always take everything Donald Trump says seriously. You shouldn't always take things that Donald Trump says absolutely literally. And I think that applies very much in this case. There's a lot of bad blood between President Trump and previous Ukrainian leaders. You know, the impeachment that happened was all because of a relationship between the Ukrainian government and the Biden family. So let's be clear. Let's be clear. Zelensky is not a dictator, but it's only right and proper that Ukrainians have a timeline for elections. I mean, after all, I recently said that I thought Keir Starmer was behaving like a dictator because we've cancelled the vote. He's cancelled the vote of 5.5 million people in local elections on May the 1st this year. So no, he's not a dictator, but there needs to be a timeline so that the Ukrainian people can vote on a peace deal.
A timeline is a very, very important piece of nuance in that conversation because, of course, the United Kingdom famously did not hold elections during the First World War. We did not hold elections during the Second World War. There wasn't a single election in this country between 1935 and 1945. Is your timeline for Ukrainian elections going to be post-war?
Tom, as you well know, I'm a keen student of history, so let's get this on the record very clearly. The United Kingdom held a general election during World War II.
1945?
It took place in the summer of 45.
After VE Day, before VJ Day.
We were still at war with Japan. No bombs had been dropped. The nuclear bomb had not been dropped. There were British soldiers dying in large numbers every single day in Japanese camps. There was vicious fighting going on.
There was peace in Europe.
Burma. Yes, we were at war. World War II was still going on. So just as a matter of historical fact, I think it's about time the British media woke up to the truth of that. Now look, I'm not suggesting Ukraine has an election tomorrow, but once we see the shape of a peace deal, then of course there should be an election.
Nigel, are you worried about the optics of Donald Trump appearing to choose an ally here, and it's not Ukraine, it's Putin?
Well, hang on a second. I mean, you know, Trump got elected saying he would talk to Putin, he would bring Putin to the negotiating table. That is exactly what he's done. And by the way, the American conversations with the Ukrainians have been endless conversations. They've been going on for year after year after year. Now look, we don't know, you don't know, I don't know what the final shape of this deal is. But is it right to try and seek a peace in a war that has now seen 1 million battle casualties? Yes. And there's great upset in Britain and Europe because, frankly, over the course of the last week, they've shown themselves to be pretty irrelevant in all of this. And I think, you know, I was listening last night to a very close, when I arrived very late, to a very close advisor of Donald Trump's. He said, look, we've been warning Europe for decades to up their military spending. You've allowed us as the Americans to carry the heavy burden for the cost of NATO. Now really is the time that you step up. And I do think one good thing that will come of this, I think at last, European nations will start to take their defence spending seriously.
Nigel, I listened intently in 2014 when you debated Nick Clegg on a different television channel. I think lots of the country watched that, and you pointed out that the European Union wanted to create an army. And you pointed out that that would be not in the favour of British security, the relationship that has kept Europe safe for decades after the Second World War has been the transatlantic relationship, NATO being that most important military alliance. Is the risk actually now that your friend Donald Trump might be undermining that argument you made 11 years ago, that NATO is our most secure guarantor? Could actually, ironically, Donald Trump pushing the Europeans to create some sort of parallel European army in the face of the ambiguity we're seeing from the Americans?
But if the Europeans drew that conclusion, and by the way, there have been those certainly within Brussels who've wanted this European army, but you saw in Paris last week, they can't agree on anything. You know, Keir Starmer put forward a proposal. He said we'd send troops, not by the way we've got any troops to send. And what happens? The Germans say no, the Poles say no. You know, Europe is all over the place on this. The important point here is Donald Trump has said repeatedly, America will fulfill its NATO commitments provided the other members play fair with America and pay the membership fees. He said it all through his first presidency. He said it in the years in between. He's saying it again very loudly and clearly. And I would suggest that all European governments and the British government listen very seriously to what the Americans are saying. Because you know what? Unlike the days of Obama, unlike the days of Clinton, this time the Americans actually mean it. They will be our best and our strongest friends and our greatest protectors, but we have to fulfill our side of the bargain. I am in no doubt that Donald Trump does not want America to walk away from NATO, but he wants it to be run on a fair and equal basis. Let's hope we do that, because frankly, if we push America away, and if we think that Europe can put together its own army, its own navy, its own air force, frankly, it will be pathetically weak, in my opinion.
OK, well, Nigel, I just wondered if you'd, on a separate note, if you'd given any thought to the Coventry South MP, Zara Sultana, and the campaign she seems to be launching against you personally and the Reform Party. She's been publicising an event in Birmingham, it seems, with a picture of yourself cartoonised, with a big, you know, no entry sign, not allowed sign, and also a letter comparing Reform to the BNP and the National Front. What do you reckon to that?
I think it's disgraceful, and frankly, I think it's almost insightful. It's very, what she said about me and about our people is very close to incitement. And clearly what she's trying to do is she's trying to get, you know, a crowd of protesters, many of whom may not behave themselves, to turn up on the 28th of March, when we're going to be holding the biggest political rally seen in the United Kingdom for many, many decades. If you believe in free speech, even if you disagree with what Farage says and what reform stands for, an attempt to stop the event from going ahead, I think is an absolute democratic disgrace. This is not the way that any elected member of Parliament should behave, and I would like to see Keir Starmer getting tough with backbenchers who behave in this appalling way. Everyone knows that reform is non-sectarian, non-racist. We're open absolutely to everybody. It's just that we're patriotic. We believe in controlling our borders and putting the interests of the British people first. That's what we stand for. You can come and argue against me. You can tell me that I'm wrong. You can tell me we should have open borders. Fine, that's democratic debate. But to try and get people to come along and close down our conference is disgraceful.
There's a slight part of me that thinks the Streisand effect might be in play here. You know, the more people protest this rally, perhaps the bigger the rally will get. But Nigel, we started this conversation with your first comments on the Trump-Russia situation. You said clearly that you do not think President Zelensky is a dictator. Just to end this interview, there is one other comment that Donald Trump has been making, that he believes that it is Ukraine that is perhaps to blame in part or in whole for the start of this war. Do you disagree with Donald Trump's implication there that it's not Russia to blame for this horrendous conflict in the east of Europe?
No. Russia is to blame for the invasion, of that there is no doubt. Were there geopolitical mistakes made by all of us in the decades that preceded that? That's an argument, that's a conversation I've had many times over the years, in particular, Tom, in 2014, when I stood up in the European Parliament and I said there will be a war in Ukraine. I was right about this, everybody else was wrong, but frankly, given where we are, whatever the historical mistakes, they're not relevant. It's Putin that invaded, it's him that's behaved badly, he's been brought to the table, and now what needs to happen is Ukraine needs to get proper security guarantees, because I think it's fair to say that after the Minsk agreement back in the 1990s, they were let down, they feel sore about that. We've got to put something in place that gives Ukraine security guarantees, and if we do that, and if they're right, and if they hold, then we will get a good and a lasting peace deal. And surely that matters more than absolutely everything.
OK, well, Nigel Farage, live from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Really, really interesting to get your thoughts on what the whole country, frankly, has been talking about.
Well, there you go. A lot of people have been waiting to hear what Nigel Farage thinks about everything that's happened in the last few days vis-à-vis Ukraine and Russia. So let us know your thoughts.
4 key takeaways from what Nigel Farage had to say. Number 1, he wants a timeline for elections in Ukraine. Perhaps even before the war has formally ended. Number 2, he wants a security guarantee for Ukraine after the end of the war. Is that actually a question of an American or a British or a European security guarantee? Is that perhaps more aligned with Sir Keir Starmer? But on those 2 points of distinction between Donald Trump, clearly 2. Number 1, Nigel Farage said that President Zelensky is not a dictator. And number 2, that Russia is responsible for their illegal invasion of Ukraine. 4 big takeaways from that interview. We're going to digest it all more after your very latest headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Your headlines at 1:35. The Kremlin has hit out at a proposal by Sir Keir Starmer to send UK troops to Ukraine as part of a potential peacekeeping mission. The Prime Minister said British troops could be deployed to Ukraine as part of a peace deal, but the Kremlin said it would not work for Russia because it would involve forces from a NATO member and therefore have ramifications for Russia's own security. Meanwhile, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has said the Ukrainian President Zelensky is not a dictator and Russia is to blame for the invasion. It's after President Donald Trump doubled down on his criticism of Zelensky overnight, calling him a dictator and warning Zelensky that he better move fast to negotiate an end to Russia's invasion of Ukraine or risk not having a nation to lead. In other news, Israel says the coffins of 4 Israeli hostages have now been transported back to the country. Earlier, Hamas handed over the bodies, including 2 of the youngest held by the terror group since being taken alive in the October 7th attack. It includes a mother and 2 children from the Bibas family, whose youngest child was just a 9-month-old baby. Hamas says the 4th body is that of 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the heart of the entire nation is torn, adding that Israel was dealing with monsters. Meanwhile, 6 living hostages are due to be freed on Saturday. Detectives investigating the Valentine's Day murder of a woman at a Kent pub believe the suspect has died after falling into the River Thames. 43-year-old Lisa Smith was killed after she was shot outside a pub in Main Road. A car driven by a man known to Lisa was found later that evening by officers abandoned on the Queen Elizabeth II bridge. A handgun was found inside the vehicle, and inquiries have since established the suspect had entered the water below. And former Spanish football chief Luis Rubiales has been found guilty over kissing player Jenni Hermoso without her consent after the Women's World Cup final in 2023. Rubiales has been ordered to pay a fine worth more than €10,000, but the Spanish High Court has acquitted him of coercion. Prosecutors had demanded a prison sentence for Rubiales. The ex-football chief grabbed Hermoso by the head and kissed her on the lips during the 2023 World Cup, which she has repeatedly said was not consensual. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2611 and €1.2074. The price of gold is £2,333 and 26 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,679 points.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Holding. In Aberdeenshire, the A981 is closed in both directions south of Fraserburgh after an accident. There are delays of up to 4 hours to P&O Irish Sea sailings between Cairnryan and Larne, up to an hour and a half to Stena Line sailings between Cairnryan and Belfast. Because of poor weather conditions, in Cumbria, the A591 is closed each way between Windermere and Ambleside after an accident. On the M6 in Cheshire, 3 lanes are closed southbound where a car's overturned between junctions 18 and 17 from the Middlewich and Holmes Chapel turn to Sandbach, causing long delays. In Pembrokeshire, the A477 is closed at Sentry Cross after an accident causing queues. Train services are suspended between Marylebone Station in London and both West Ruislip and Harrow on the Hill because of a signalling problem, with trains between Birmingham and London only travelling as far south as Bicester North, and Skybus flights to and from the Isles of Scilly are on hold because of poor weather conditions.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Well, a new poll commissioned by Channel 4 shows that more than half of Gen Z believe that Britain should be ruled by a dictator. Seriously, they actually said that. Well, 1 in 3 would want an army. What's the army in charge? 1 in 3 want martial law.
There's something on the idea of some form of strong leadership. They have looked at British politics. They have looked at the politics in which they grow up in. And they see failures at the democratic level. They see a weak, a soft, a centre that doesn't do anything, makes promises and fails to deliver them. They see nothing actually happening. And they also see a future where they have no democratic engagement because they're never going to have a house. They're never going to have a family. Why would they? Why would they be able to? So the idea of having somebody strong to come through and blow away the cobwebs of our current system, I can see that being attractive. When I grew up, I was talking to not that old men, and and women who had been through the war, who knew what dictatorship was. Up until the 70s, we were in the Cold War. People knew what dictatorship was. They knew people being locked up, being sent to Siberia. They knew what this meant. And I don't think anybody under the age of 34 actually has a clue. It's all the other side of the world. It's in North Korea, it's in China. It's not here, and it's not part of their lived experience. And that's a big change.
And I wonder, actually, Nigel, if a lot of these people think, I don't know, like Donald Trump's a dictator. He got elected with a huge mandate. Do they understand what dictators is? Or, actually, are young people just so listless? They're so feeble-minded, they need to be told what to do and how to live.
I certainly think that Gwen's right about there's a disillusionment with democracy and the results of it. The idea that a dictatorship is the answer to it, or having the military rule over us, is obvious nonsense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 42 minutes past 1. Now, on this programme, in the last 10 minutes, we have learned 4 key pieces of information from the Reform Party leader, Nigel Farage. Of course, there had been no official comment from the Reform Party following the explosive statements from the US president over the role of President Zelensky of Ukraine, over the role of Ukraine in its own invasion. Of course, the President of the United States seemed to suggest that Ukraine was responsible for its own invasion, and he branded President Zelensky, the elected president of Ukraine, as a dictator.
Yes, so we put some of those accusations to Nigel Farage because we hadn't heard what Nigel thought of what's happened over the last couple of days with regard to President Zelensky and, of course, Donald Trump's comments, controversial comments, let's say. And Nigel did say he's not a dictator, but he said he'd like to see a timeline for an election, which is interesting. He also said the Ukraine is not responsible for the war. Putin is responsible for the invasion of Ukraine, but he did say that geopolitical mistakes have been made that brought us to the point of the invasion. That had there not been some mistakes made over in the West, Putin wouldn't have invaded.
He also said that there should be security guarantees for Ukraine after a peace has been agreed. Now, this is an incredibly important point because is this the same position that Sir Keir Starmer has taken? Is this a pan-European security guarantee? Is this an American security guarantee? Is this a NATO security guarantee? Or is this a British security guarantee? Of course, Nigel Farage would say this is all to be worked out, but that some form of security guarantee must be as part of the peace deal. Otherwise, frankly, the peace deal is not worth the paper it's written on if it can't be enforced by any means other than Ukraine once again heroically standing up to the Russian tanks by itself. It does seem that for the first time this is a significant shift, at least in rhetoric, from the Reform Party. The implication that NATO, Western European or British forces must be part of a security guarantee.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? O'Connor's got in touch and he says, so you think it's vital to hear what Farage thinks about Ukraine? He's got 5 MPs. Well, it is actually, because Nigel Farage is polling at 27, his 27 points. They're polling the most popular party currently, the Reform Party is. So I think it is vital to actually hear from someone who is in particularly more vital, as well as he is friends with Donald Trump, the leader of the United States of America, which makes it even more important that we hear what Nigel Farage has to say.
Well, frankly, I think a lot of the country was waiting to hear what Nigel Farage would have to say, because there had been some silence, not just from Nigel Farage, but from all the Reform MPs who are normally very active on their social media accounts. Now, to be fair to Nigel Farage, he was on an aeroplane during much of that time. It's in the morning now. It's not even 9 o'clock in the morning in Washington, D.C. But there is still that big question. How does Nigel Farage walk this tightrope? I think we've started to see those first tentative steps. Now, part of this is an assertion from Nigel Farage that Donald Trump should be taken seriously, but not literally. The implication there that Donald Trump doesn't literally believe Zelensky is a dictator, that he doesn't literally believe that Ukraine is responsible for this war. But that in itself is perhaps an issue for reform. What if Donald Trump comes out and says, no, I literally do believe this? That would be, I mean, the point being that now Nigel Farage has put his cards on the table, that does expose him to some political risk too.
Also, Nigel compared what Trump said with the dictator comment to his own comments that he made about Keir Starmer with regards to the delayed local elections. He said he's acting like a dictator. Did Nigel Farage genuinely believe that Keir Starmer was a dictator? Probably not. A turn of phrase, I suppose, is what he's saying there.
Yes. Although I think slightly different when it's in the context of having some chummy phone calls and offering state visits to Vladimir Putin. I think this is going to be one of the big issues. I mean, how much of this is bluster from Trump, where he's just trying to warm up the Russians so that they can feel good about agreeing to a deal that they don't want? Or how much of this is Donald Trump taking hook, line and sinker, the Russian line on this, being enamoured by the promise of a state visit? We know how much Donald Trump loves a gold palace and loves all the regalia that goes along with the sort of quasi-monarchical system of the new Tsar of Russia, Vladimir Putin, term limited as he was as president, only to become prime minister and then president again. I mean, that's real dictator behaviour. But perhaps someone like Donald Trump does like to be in the presence of those more permanent world leaders. We saw that he enjoyed a visit to North Korea, to the DMZ, where he met with Kim Jong-un in his last presidency. Perhaps he likes the idea of playing statesman.
Do you know what? I think most of us sitting here hoping that peace will eventually come and that people will stop dying. But this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We're going to have more reaction to Farage's comments, and we're also expecting to hear from the Defence Secretary, John Healey, very shortly. Stay with us.
Hello. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's turned a lot milder, but it's also turned wet and windy, and many of us will have a pretty soggy and blustery couple of days, thanks to low pressure systems and their weather fronts which have been marching in. Look at the number of isobars across the UK. It is gusty, particularly close to these bands of rain, one of which bringing some heavy downpours across western Scotland, North Wales through the lunchtime period, then into northwest England, southern Scotland, some hailstones mixed in with the heavy rain and gusty winds. Spells of rain too across the southeast, something a bit drier elsewhere, and it may brighten up a little bit in a few places, and if it does, we could see temperatures 14-15 degrees. It is mild, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily feel that mild, particularly with the wind and the rain. Still some heavy bursts of rain crossing northern England through this evening's rush hour, and still some lively showers moving across Scotland also, but some decent clear spells, and overall it will be turning drier as we go through this evening, certainly for much of Northern Ireland. Still quite breezy, however. The heavy downpour should be easing from northern England by about 7-8 o'clock, and the rain also clearing through the late evening from parts of Kent, which will leave many places dry for a time, but down to the southwest more rain starts to gather, and that moves in through the early hours. Again, some bright colours there, some heavy downpours, particularly for Wales, Northern Ireland, and spreading into Scotland. Look at the temperatures, a very mild night, many places staying in double digits. But the wind and the rain could cause some disruption during Friday. We've got warnings in place across West Wales, the east of Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and central Scotland, where the rain will persist. The warnings for wind and for rain. Much of eastern England having a dry day on Friday till that rain comes in through the evening time. And again, it will be very mild, just won't necessarily feel that way.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 10 to 2. And to recap, exclusive news on this programme, Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We have learnt that the Reform Party does believe that Ukraine was illegally invaded by Vladimir Putin. Nigel Farage told us exclusively that he does not believe President Zelensky is a dictator. Of course, these two lines seem to go against recent comments by US President Trump.
Yes, well, do we all have to agree with everything that Trump says if you happen to support him? I mean, there's a lot of people who agree with Trump on net zero. They might agree on transgenderism. They might agree on tariffs. They might agree on getting rid of woke. They might agree on tax cuts. But do you have to agree on everything?
How can you agree on raising taxes, i.e. tariffs, and then cutting... Anyway...
I was just going through the policies I can remember of Donald Trump.
We won't go into that wormhole, we won't. But of course there were two positive policies as well as those comments with regard to what Nigel Farage personally believes as to whether or not Zelensky is a dictator. We also heard the Reform Party does believe there should be a timeline for elections in Ukraine. This will be a controversial policy because, of course, elections in wartime, as they could be, are very hard to handle. I mean, the number of Ukrainians who have left that country as refugees, would they have to return to vote? The number of people who've been internally displaced within Ukraine, how can you have constituency voting with regard to that internal migration? Very, very difficult questions to host an election during wartime, although what Nigel Farage did say is that in 1945, technically, the Second World War was still ongoing when we had elections in this country, although it was after VE Day.
We descended into a little squabble, didn't we? The two men, Tom and Nigel, about the exact date when elections were and where exactly it sat in peacetime, or whether we were still at war. Yes, OK. Pedantic much. But yes, interesting that he says not a dictator, but we do need a timeline for elections.
Yeah, and this is a really crucial element because, of course, he also spoke about security guarantees. Now, we really do want your thoughts here at Good Afternoon Britain on this. And indeed, security guarantees is the policy of the British government. So let's listen in to the Defence Secretary, John Healey.
Mr Sandvik, in your first 2 weeks in the job, but it underlines the strength of the security and military relationship of our two countries, and the fact that we have come together from the conference rooms of NATO and Munich to the High North and here in Bodo is a special sign of what is a deep and close military relationship that is getting deeper and closer every day. We are the two nations, after all, as you said, the two European nations that for decades have protected the northern flank of NATO together. And this is now a once-in-a-generation opportunity, the chance to deepen further that military, industry and nation partnership between our two countries. So we have today signed an agreement, a declaration that we will work now to forge a deep, ambitious new defence agreement, and we'll do that by the summer. That will cover the need both countries and others have to protect our critical underwater infrastructure, work we're doing together here on Proteus, our UK ship, and Bison, your Norwegian ship, moored alongside. We will bring our militaries closer together, and we've spoken to our UK commandos and Royal Marines that are exercising with yours in the High North in Norway, not just exercising, but beginning now joint training for missions. And we will also bring our industries closer together. And it's a sweet circle that this UK RFA ship, Proteus, was built, of course, in Norway. And on Ukraine, we've said as two European nations that we will step up further the support we give to Ukraine. Ukraine is still fighting. We must keep them in the fight. We must try and keep them strong to secure that peace for the long term. And as two nations, Norway and Britain, we jointly lead the maritime coalition of a dozen nations that is supporting Ukraine, especially with maritime power, and helping them build up their own power for the future. So finally, this is the talk of Europe stepping up to support Ukraine, stepping up for European security. This is the talk of those European nations in action here, Norway and the UK together.
Okay, so then we'll have a question from the NRK.
Norwegian Broadcasting.
Well, there we have it. The Defence Secretary John Healey announcing an agreement with Norway covering a vast number of areas. Joint training between the British Army and the Norwegian Army. Not just joint exercises, joint training now. Military cooperation. Of course, Norway and Britain both lead that dozen-country maritime coalition, helping Ukraine in their naval endeavours. But also, crucially and perhaps most interestingly in this agreement, in this announcement from the Defence Secretary, it will cover underwater infrastructure. We know there have been huge amounts of concern over Russian tampering with crucial underwater, undersea cables, undersea pipelines. There will now be joint cooperation between Norway and the United Kingdom to keep that vital undersea infrastructure safe. Is this a big sign to Vladimir Putin that there's going to be a huge amount more cooperation between those two big naval powers in this part of the world, around the North Sea and the Arctic, Norway and the United Kingdom?
Yes, I imagine that is the plan, to try and combat the threat from Putin in the Arctic area and to show support to Norway and surrounding countries that they will help defend the area from any threat from Russia. So there you go. We'll bring you anything else that we hear in that respect. But it is now time for the Great British Giveaway. If you want to be one of the two new winners, each with a new iPhone, shopping vouchers and £10,000 in tax-free cash, here's how to enter.
We're doubling your chances to win in our latest Great British Giveaway, with two fabulous prize bundles up for grabs. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. And the best news is, 2 lucky winners are going to win. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain. We're coming up to 2 o'clock. And Nigel Farage distances himself from his good friend Donald Trump by declaring that President Zelensky...
Let's be clear, Zelensky is not a dictator.
Washington. Well, how will the Reform UK leader's words go down in Washington?
And the BBC is forced to apologise for letting the son of a Hamas government minister narrate a prime-time documentary on the conflict. They've been accused of failing to carry out the most basic journalistic checks.
And as it's revealed that comedy shows are set to be prescribed by the NHS for patients struggling with mental health conditions, we're asking, is comedy the best medicine, or has the NHS become a laughingstock? Huge news has broken today on Good Afternoon Britain after what some journalists were describing as a moment of silence from Reform Party politicians. We now know what Nigel Farage thinks on Ukraine, and he disagreed with his friend Donald Trump.
Yes, he does. Although he did say that we should take Donald Trump's words seriously, but not always literally, so there might be some room for agreement too, but he certainly disagreed that President Zelensky is a dictator. He said he isn't a dictator, but there should be a timeline for elections. He did say that. And he said that Putin is responsible for the illegal invasion of Ukraine. So there you go.
Crucially, that the elections must be there so that people can vote on the peace deal, which is an interesting element of this election timetable, that the Farage position is that Ukrainians themselves must be able to have a say on the terms of their peace. Now, how this is carried out in practice, I think, is really very difficult. As we know, there are millions of Ukrainians who aren't in Ukraine. They're spread out across countries like Poland, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, who've taken each hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. How will they vote? And how will you have a sort of constituency basis for those votes? Similarly, the internal displacement of individuals within Ukraine, the details become tricky. Although it must be said that, as Nigel Farage pointed out, you don't need all the dots to be, all the I's to be dotted or the T's to be crossed in an agreement before you can have a peace. So some really interesting nuance there to the position. And the question will be, will this align with the American position?
OK, well, do get in touch, gbnews.com/yoursaber. Let's get to the headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Your headlines just after 2 o'clock. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has said the Ukrainian President Zelensky is not a dictator and Russia is to blame for the invasion. It's after President Donald Trump doubled down on his criticism of Volodymyr Zelensky overnight, calling him a dictator and warning that he better move fast to negotiate an end to Russia's invasion of Ukraine or risk not having a nation to lead. Speaking exclusively on GB News, Farage said, "You should always take everything Donald Trump says seriously, and you shouldn't always take things Donald Trump says absolutely literally. I think that applies very much to this case," he said, later on adding, "Let's be clear, Zelensky is not a dictator, but it's only right and proper that Ukrainians have a timeline for elections." Meanwhile, the Kremlin has hit out at a proposal by Sir Keir Starmer to send UK troops to Ukraine as part of a potential peacekeeping mission. The Prime Minister said British troops could be deployed to Ukraine as part of a peace deal, but the Kremlin said it would not work for Russia because it would involve forces from a NATO member and therefore have ramifications for Russia's own security. In other news, Israel says the coffins of 4 Israeli hostages have now been transported to the country. Earlier, Hamas handed over the bodies, including the 2 youngest, held by the terror group since being taken alive in the October 7th attack. It includes a mother and 2 children from the Bibas family, whose youngest child was just a 9-month-old baby. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the heart of the entire nation is torn, adding that Israel was dealing with monsters. The Army's handling of a soldier's sexual assault complaint played more than a minimal contributory role in her death. That's according to a coroner. Royal Artillery gunner Jaisley Beck, 19 years old, was found dead in her room at Larkhill Camp in Wiltshire on the 15th of December 2021. An inquest today recorded a conclusion of suicide. We will bring you more on that story as we get it. Now, detectives investigating the Valentine's Day murder of a woman at a Kent pub believe the suspect has died after falling into the River Thames. 43-year-old Lisa Smith was killed after she was shot outside a pub in Main Road. A car driven by a man known to Lisa was found later that evening by officers abandoned on the Queen Elizabeth II bridge. A handgun was found inside the vehicle and inquiries have since established the suspect had entered the water below. Former Spanish football chief Luis Rubiales has been found guilty over kissing player Jenni Hermoso without her consent after the Women's World Cup final in 2023. Rubiales has been ordered to pay a fine worth more than €10,000, but the Spanish High Court has acquitted him of coercion. Prosecutors had demanded a prison sentence for Rubiales. The ex-football chief grabbed Hermoso by the head and kissed her on the lips during the 2023 World Cup, which she has repeatedly said was not consensual. And the Culture Secretary will question BBC bosses about a documentary on Gaza that was narrated by a son of a Hamas official. The broadcaster has been criticised for Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone, which centred on a 13-year-old boy who is the son of Hamas's Deputy Minister of Agriculture. Speaking to the media today, Lisa Nandy said she would discuss the matter with the BBC's Director General and Chairman. The BBC has since said it has not been informed of the family connection in advance by the film's production company and has apologised for the omission of that detail. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 2:07 in the afternoon. And yes, Nigel Farage has chosen to break his silence on our show this afternoon on what he makes of Donald Trump's comments vis-à-vis President Zelensky of Ukraine. Now, listening to the interview was Christopher Hope, our GB News political editor. Christopher, very interesting what Nigel Farage had to say, distancing himself somewhat from Donald Trump and his comments, some of them at least.
That's right. He's kind of taken a slightly middle path, I think. When he said there that you should take things that Trump said seriously, well, we all agree with that one. He's, of course, President of the United States, but not literally. I think this is the point that people who work with Trump try and tell us. You've got to separate out what he says and what he actually does. He talks about tariffs, for example, with Mexico and Canada, and then retreats when they move troops to the border to stop illegal crossings. So he says later, though, interesting, and I think all he could say was this, that let's be clear, Zelensky is not a dictator. Well, that is obvious. He is not a dictator, but that needs to be stated after what Trump said yesterday in that post on Truth Social. And indeed, it's what Kevin Badenoch said yesterday, and of course, Keir Starmer told Zelensky himself last night. But then he adds it's only right and proper that there's a timeline for elections. Now, that might sound like a good thing, and we all agree elections are good, and of course Ukraine elections were delayed from last year. But the point about that is, what about the area that's Russia controlled? Do they get a free vote, and who do they vote for? Do they vote for Ukraine, and will Russia have any bearing on those areas? So the issue of free elections, while you can call for that, practically how it's done isn't very clear. But I think Farage has done what he had to do here. He's distanced himself from Trump. He's tried to explain what Trump meant. He says things that are dramatic. He may not mean them. Well, let's hope that's the case in terms of what Trump said about Ukraine and Zelensky yesterday.
This is, of course, all in the context of a fraught and perhaps difficult tightrope for the Reform Party to walk. Has Nigel Farage given himself enough wiggle room here with this seriously but not literally comment? I do see a pathway whereby this could actually cause him to become a little bit stuck, if indeed Donald Trump doubles down on his dictator comments. I mean, this might have placated things for now, but on the other hand, it could box Reform UK into a corner.
I think you'll work day by day with Trump. I mean, if you look back, even look at Starmer's, how he's been going on a seesaw, really, since last week. When he went off to Brussels, he met with European leaders on their terms. It was just humiliating. He met in where Ted Heath signed the deal to join the European Union. Farage called it humiliation. And then fast forward to this week, when, of course, you have Starmer in Paris as a person building himself up as the bridge between the European Union and the USA. And then today he's got to phone up Zelensky and says he doesn't agree with what Trump says. And that's just the leader of our country. So it's difficult. I think day by day you've got to navigate what does Trump really mean. And I do go back, I think, of all the politicians, I think, in this country who know him best, you've got to say it's probably Farage. He's been with him and campaigning with him when no one else would back in 2016. And I just wonder whether there's some point when the people around Starmer, the PM, might go, well, let's try and use Farage. Farage is a patriot. He wants to be supportive. He told Keir Starmer exactly that when they met, and camera saw them meet, didn't they, in House of Commons chamber during one of those votes at the end of last year. He wants to be supportive of the government, and this could be a space where he really is. I don't think there's any party political division on supporting Ukraine, and given that, perhaps Labour should say, well, let's try and bring Farage into the tent and understand that when Trump says things, he may not mean them.
Now, we heard a little bit earlier from the Defence Secretary speaking in Norway. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Because Russia invaded the territory of a sovereign state. This war is continuing because the Ukrainians are fighting with great courage, military and civilians alike. And this war could be ended today if President Putin withdrew his troops from Ukraine. We all want to see an end to the fighting. We all want to see a durable peace. We all recognise that peace must come through strength. President Trump has said that. President Zelensky has said that. And our special job as defence ministers is to continue to support Ukraine in the fight. We've been two European nations providing. We will continue to do that, and we will step that up, and part of our discussions have been today about how we do so. And we are ready in the UK also to play a part if we get to a point where the fighting stops and security guarantees are required for the long term, because the one feature of any ceasefire and any peace is that it must not be something that is broken again by Russia re-invading Ukraine.
What do you think about the future for
More careful language than Keir Starmer used when he spoke about how he'd consider putting British troops in harm's way. Christopher, what do you make of that from the Defence Secretary?
Well, I take two things from that straight away. Hearing him say that we can't put UK troops into Ukraine until there's a peace deal is really important. It means that UK troops won't be on the front line fighting with Russia. That should be avoided at all costs. And also, I just wonder what you want to hear from John Healey, and he's pushing for, I'm sure, behind the scenes, is when are we going to get this roadmap to 2.5% of GDP? And that's barely enough. That debate's almost been had and been dealt with now, given the scale of pressure, I think, on our defence budgets as the US backs away from supporting Ukraine. I think what's going to happen in coming weeks, we're going to see a lot more on defence spending, and they may even bring forward that Lord Robertson review and try and get this going quickly to provide some comfort to Ukraine.
Yeah, some really big decisions there. Interesting, just finally, Chris, one of the things we heard from Nigel Farage is his personal support for a security guarantee for Ukraine in the wake of any peace deal. I mean, it seems like perhaps, actually, with this shift from John Healey that we've just heard in the last few minutes and the comments we heard from Nigel Farage 45 minutes ago, but perhaps, actually, these two parties have moved closer together in the space of the last hour.
Yeah, you'd think so. I mean, I just think there's a common cause here. In look at the polls, as you said, we said earlier, didn't we? 3% of people believe what Trump says about Ukraine provoking Russia. 77% of us think that it's frankly invading a sovereign territory. Anyone who purports to run this country as Prime Minister understands that, gets that, and that's why you've got a common cause between Kevin Badenoch, Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage. And whether those three can come together now and tell that to Trump in terms starting next week in Washington, there's an opportunity here, I think, to work together for the national interest. Whether they can take it and put aside egos and other domestic politics, we'll wait and see.
OK, well, Christopher Hope, thank you very much indeed for talking us through all of that. Christopher Hope over in Westminster for us, where he usually is.
Indeed. This has been a big day for defence in the United Kingdom. We've seen not just Nigel Farage, but also the Defence Secretary, John Healey, now talk about defence guarantees for Ukraine. But the thing is, the language here is so very ambiguous. We know that there wants to be this sort of amorphous defence guarantee, but we don't know if that means troops on the ground, air support, we don't know.
Also, is it not all a bit premature? I mean, people are talking about how they don't like the look of President Trump sitting down with Putin. Fair enough. People are talking about how it looks like, you know, it could be a bit of an appeasement. That Putin is now becoming the ally of the United States rather than the Ukrainian president, which obviously is a worry to European leaders. But we don't have a peace settlement.
No.
So we have a war at the moment, and we're talking about peacekeeping and all of this. It does seem a little premature to me, but perhaps I'm wrong.
No, it really does. Of course, we were speaking with Nigel Farage about the analogy to Britain in the Second World War, where, of course, we had an election in 1935. We were supposed to have another election in the autumn of 1940, but, of course, we didn't have another one for 5 years because of the Second World War.
But, you know, the Americans have pointed out that they did have elections during their wars.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's very easy to have an election when, frankly, there's no bombs being dropped on your country.
Yes, I suppose so. But in other news, our hearts lie in tatters. Those are the words of Israel's President Isaac Herzog after Hamas returned the bodies of 4 hostages, including those of 2 children. Here is the moment one of the coffins was handed over.
Extraordinary image, but not just extraordinary image, extraordinary sound, a festival-like atmosphere, upbeat music, as the coffin of a hostage is carried to the back of a transit van.
I mean, it's just grim beyond belief, isn't it? 3 of the bodies are those of the 32-year-old Shiri Bibas and her 2 sons, Ariel and Kavir, who were just 4 years and 9 months old when they were captured. And Hamas says the 4th body is that of 84-year-old Odev Lifshitz, who I understand was a peace activist.
Well, the Red Cross convoy carrying the coffins entered Israel a couple of hours ago. But let's get some news live from Tel Aviv now and go and speak to the Israeli journalist, Yotam Confino. Yotam, I am almost at a loss for words when I see this propaganda footage from Hamas. How anyone on earth with a heart can look at that footage, that almost jubilation in Gaza, with those 4 coffins of those hostages lying there. It beggars belief.
It does, but it's not just in Gaza, and I think it's very, very important for the Western world to understand this, that the moral depravity that we're seeing in Gaza today, really modern Nazi Islamism, is not just happening in Gaza, it's happening across the West. There are hundreds of thousands of people in Western capitals who agree with Hamas that what they're doing is the right thing, to wipe Israel and any living person inside Israel off the face of the earth. And they're marching in capitals. So I would say that today was shocking. It was a new low, even for Hamas standards. But I don't think that this is really surprising, because we know what Hamas stands for. They wanted to commit genocide on October the 7th. They raped, beheaded, and burned people alive. Of course, they were going to throw a parade when they're releasing hostages who have been tortured and, in this instance, been killed, even if they're children. What I do think is important to mention here is that how many children are currently watching what's happening in Gaza because their parents are bringing them to this horror show. These kids have no future. They are being brought up in the same death spiral and death cult that Hamas has been parading for decades. So if you're talking about a 2-state solution, not you specifically, but generally people in the West, you're delusional, absolutely delusional.
Well, Yotam, you're absolutely right that the jubilation and celebration of Israeli deaths is not just in Gaza. We saw it here on the day of October the 7th in London. We saw a celebration. We have consistently seen Hamas propaganda on the streets of Britain, most commonly in our capital, at various protest marches and rallies. Islamism in the West is on the rise.
Absolutely it is. I come from Denmark, and I can tell you that just last weekend, another pro-Palestinian demonstration, as they call it, they took place in Copenhagen, and afterwards the streets are filled with Hamas posters, Hamas stickers, graffiti, and it's everywhere, really. So if you have to understand what kind of danger that this phenomenon poses to not just Israelis and Jews, but to Westerners in general, because they loathe the system and the democracies that they live in, and they would like to bring what we see in the Middle East to the West, which is, it's a fact at this point. As for Israel and the Palestinians, I can tell you that the images coming out of Gaza today has enraged so many Israelis that I believe that once the hostages are out, if they do come out, the remaining 69 hostages, I think that we will see simply just Israel going back to war with Hamas, because it cannot and will not accept having these people as neighbors.
I find this so difficult, Yassam, because I know people who go on some of these marches, and I don't think any of them are imagining the footage we're seeing today when they go on those marches. They're imagining, you know, the terrible loss of life for many innocent civilians, frankly, on both sides of the conflict. But I find it so difficult to understand that point of view when it's there in black and white. I wonder if you can get that image back up again, the deeply anti-Semitic image of the Israeli Prime Minister with fangs in his mouth, printed by Hamas, the celebration around those coffins. And let's not forget, this isn't Israeli footage. This is Hamas footage that they themselves have recorded, produced and released to the world. I mean, these people aren't hiding who they are. They're screaming it from the rooftops.
That's the scary part. And if we compare to the Nazis, at least the Nazis tried to cover up some of their crimes. Hamas wants the world to see this because they know that there are hundreds of millions of people in the world who are deeply anti-Semitic and who enjoy this. The GoPro live footage from October the 7th, that's something that people took joy in. They were celebrating it. Doctors, nurses, teachers, you name it. And so I'm not surprised that they're filming all of this today, because they know that the value of the propaganda is extraordinary. And they don't care that there'll be a condemnation from Berlin or from Downing Street. They don't care. At the end of the day, the world is not rallying to wipe them off the face of the earth. The world is trying to bring about a two-state solution where Hamas might actually play a role. So, of course they're going to do this. Why wouldn't they?
OK, well, Yotam Confino, thank you very much indeed. You're an Israeli journalist in Tel Aviv, a beautiful backdrop there of the sea. And this is why I worry about the push in this country from certain MPs and activists and the like for refugees to be taken from Gaza to this country. It's not because I don't believe that there are Gazans living in the most awful conditions and that they would potentially be safer in this country. It's because I worry about importing more anti-Semitism, more extremism into this country, and I think that's absolutely fair to say.
It's such a tricky one, but this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more coming on today's show. Of course, we want your response to those stories that we've been discussing, and my goodness me, I'm sure you will have a lot to say. But also, we'll be speaking to a pub landlord who has taken down the Union Jack from his establishment, or should I say Union flag, claiming he is no longer proud to be British.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Have you noticed that more and more stores are closing? Well, last year, apparently 13,000 stores closed for the last time on the high street.
Well, experts warn the worst is still to come for our small businesses.
Well, let's talk to retail expert Jeremy Baker. Good morning to you, Jeremy. How bad is it and what can be done?
Well, nothing can be done about it. Retail is like that. It's a boom and bust operation. So last year, let's say you had a shop and it was booming. This year, the consumer can just change their mind. They don't need to come back to your shop ever again.
Well, it is sad, Jeremy, because our high streets are the beating heart of our communities, aren't they? And for many people, I know I can relate to my high street, it is such a depressing sight, walking down there and seeing them all boarded up and closed down.
But how often do you walk down that boarded up high street? I think people move on to something else. The online world is very big. Yeah. And lots of other things are very exciting. And so people, you know, the shop, I like to go to my GP in a shopping centre and get my tests done there rather than tramp off all the way to the GP, for example. And children could go to little schools in the high street. I've seen that happen already. So lots of things could happen to the high street. It could be much more a social centre. Much more kind of like pubs, coffee shops, all that. Charities. I don't see anything wrong with charities taking over, but the idea of this shop-centred high street finished, that's gone, never coming back. Goodbye. It's not sad, it's just life.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 27 minutes past 2, and a pub landlord has revealed that he has taken down the Union flag from his establishment, claiming he is no longer proud to be British. Yes, he revealed this exclusively to GB News.
Well, Guy Richardson, who owns the Bright Star pub in Luton, says that despite feeling very patriotic, he feels victimised by Keir Starmer's Labour government.
OK, well, Guy Richardson, delighted to say he joins us now. Guy, thank you very much indeed. So this sounds like it's a bit of a protest.
Not quite so much a protest, more I just don't think currently that we haven't got a lot to be proud about in this country. We've got our history, we've got our culture, we've got our heritage, absolutely for sure. But currently, there's nothing I can say I'm really, really proud that I'm British at the moment. Very patriotic, not proud.
Isn't that what sort of patriotism is, though? You still fly your flag even though you might disagree with the current policy or the current people in charge or whatever. Isn't patriotism something that runs more deeply than that? That flag doesn't just stand for a moment in time, it stands for so much more.
I totally agree with you there. However, what I don't want to sort of look as if I'm happy with where we're going. It's almost a sort of a protest in itself to say, no, I will fly both of my flags with pride, beyond pride, but only when the time is right and we've got something we can actually shout from the rooftops about. At the minute, I don't think we have.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who feel like you at the moment, who feel, you know, what exactly am I proud to be British for anymore? What in particular has got to you, though, Guy?
I just think we're selling our soul. As a country, as a nation, I think we're selling our soul. Everything that we're good at, everything that we're known throughout the world as being good at, we're just letting it go. We're letting it slip. And we're allowing it to happen. And I think it's a shame.
Don't you think part of, perhaps, losing a sense of national identity or pride is the fact that not so many people fly the flag. What I want to put to you, Guy Richardson, is, frankly, and I mean this in the most polite way possible, are you part of the problem if you take down your flags?
Am I part of the problem? I'd love to be part of the solution. I would love every property in this country to fly the Union flag. Every property. And I would fly it, well, as I did, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. But I don't want to be that person that capitulates to what this current government are allowing to happen.
Well, you know what, Guy? I'm just looking at your beautiful pub. It's absolutely stunning. How long have you run that pub then for?
Oh, crikey. I've been here, I'm into my 5th full year now. So I came in just before COVID, so I timed it perfectly.
Oh.
You look like you're in the sort of countryside surrounding Luton rather than, in the town centre.
Well, we're not. We're in Hertfordshire, so we've got a Luton postcode, but we're not actually in Luton. You could 15-minute drive from Luton, but it's very misleading. But it's beautiful countryside.
So, what could Keir Starmer do to turn this all around and have you back flying that flag with pride?
Open his eyes, all of them. Our entire cabinet. Just open your eyes, see what's going on in this country, listen to people, listen to what's happening, listen to what's going on, listen to people, what people want or would like, but just come out of their little bubble they seem to be in and just do things that are clearly better for our country, better for our people.
Well, clearly, if they ran the country like you run your pub, then we'd be doing better, because I'm just looking and you've got many a 5-star review. Many a 5-star review. Guy, thank you very much indeed for your time. I hope you're back flying that flag sooner rather than later, I must say.
So do I. Oh, absolutely, so do I. But bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy.
Brilliant. Well, Guy Richardson, thanks so much for joining us.
We should have a little trip to the Bright Star pub. It looks rather nice, doesn't it?
Absolutely. In Hertfordshire, despite its Luton postcode, I do feel... well, there are people who sort of live in London but have an Essex postcode.
Are you being rude about Luton?
I'm not being rude about Luton.
You're going to have the Luton mob getting in touch?
Oh, no. I think all parts of the United Kingdom are splendid in their own way.
Ever the diplomat is Tom Harwood. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Are you proud to fly the flag at the moment, or do you feel a bit like Guy from the Bright Star pub? Let us know. But we've got lots more coming up on today's show. A veterans charity is on the brink of closing unless they can raise £12,800 by the end of today. We're going to be joined by the charity founder after your headlines.
Very good afternoon to you from the newsroom. Just after 2:30, the top story this hour. The UK and Norway have both signed a landmark declaration to forge a major new agreement and step up defences against growing Russian threats. The Defence Secretary is currently in Norway amid warnings that Russia has long developed the ability to sabotage critical underwater systems and could use it in a future conflict. Both nations are now tightening intelligence sharing, ramping up military training and deploying cutting-edge surveillance to detect potential attacks beneath the sea. Well, John Healey's also vowed to step up further support for Ukraine and in the last few minutes said that the government here in the UK must keep the Ukrainians in the fight.
Our job is to stand with the Ukrainians, support the Ukrainians, support them in their fight, and if they choose to talk, support them in the negotiations as well. And I'm a defence minister, and I don't want to see us jeopardising the peace by forgetting the war.
Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has said the Ukrainian President Zelensky is not a dictator and that Russia is to blame for the invasion. That comes after President Donald Trump doubled down on his criticism of Volodymyr Zelensky overnight, calling him a dictator and warning Zelensky that he'd better move fast to negotiate an end to Russia's invasion of Ukraine or risk having no nation to lead. Well, speaking on GB News earlier, Farage said you should always take everything Donald Trump says seriously, but added you shouldn't always take things Donald Trump says absolutely literally. He also later said, let's be clear, Zelensky is not a dictator. Well, meanwhile, the Kremlin has hit out at a proposal by the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer to send UK troops to Ukraine as part of a potential peacekeeping mission. Starmer said British troops could be deployed to Ukraine as part of a peace deal, but the Kremlin said it would not work for Russia because it would involve forces from a NATO member and therefore have ramifications for Russia's own security. And the Army's failure to properly investigate abuse complaints contributed to the suicide of a teenage soldier. A coroner has ruled today. Jaisley Beck, a 19-year-old, was found dead in her room at Larkhill Camp in Wiltshire in 2021 after months of harassment from her superior, Ryan Mason, who sent her thousands of WhatsApp messages. She also accused another senior soldier of assault, but her complaint was dismissed as a minor administrative action. The coroner has found the failure was more than a minimal factor in her death. That's the news on GB News. A full roundup of all the top stories at 3 o'clock, and Tom and Emily will be straight back with you after this.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Holding. In Aberdeenshire, the A981 is closed south of Fraserburgh after an accident. There are delays of up to 4 hours to P&O Irish Sea sailings between Cairnryan and Larne, up to an hour and a half to Stena Line sailings between Cairnryan and Belfast because of poor weather conditions. In Cumbria, the A591 is closed each way between Windermere and Ambleside after an accident causing queues. On the M6 in Cheshire, 2 out of 4 lanes are closed southbound where a car overturned between junctions 18 and 17 from the Middlewich and Holmes Chapel turn to Sandbach, causing long delays. Train services in London are suspended between Marylebone and both West Ruislip and Harrow on the Hill because of a signalling problem. On the M25 from Essex into Kent, there are clockwise queues over the QE2 bridge towards junction 1B at Dartford after traffic was stopped because of an accident. And Skybus flights to and from the Isles of Scilly are on hold at the moment because of poor weather conditions.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Co weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right. It's 2:38 and it's time to speak to Dawn Neeson because she is actually in for Martin Daubney today. Martin's slacking off today, isn't he, Dawn? But you're up from 3 o'clock. What are you going to be talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Just call me Dawn Daubney. That's absolutely fine. I have no problems with that whatsoever. It's becoming a bit of a thing with us.
You told your husband?
We have got a cracking show. Oh no, he doesn't care. He'd actually be grateful, probably pay Martin, to be honest with you. In any case, we've got the most amazing show coming out. We have got, honestly, Emily and Tom, probably the most shocking story that I have come across in a long time, and it's not one you'll be reading in any of your newspapers. So I'm going to be talking about that, and I found it really horrific. So stay tuned for that. You don't want to miss that one. Not going to give any details away because it is a real horror show. Also, obviously, we're talking about the Ukraine. How can we not? And we are talking to some Ukrainians to see how they feel about what's going on and the rhetoric around this entire story. And we have also got some fun with Mr. Bond, a story that's going to leave you shaken and stirred.
Oh, shaken and stirred. What a treat.
I love how cryptic this teaser's been, Dawn. We'll be on the end of our seats. Well, we'll see you at 3.
Fantastic stuff. There you go. Dawn Neeson, not Dawn Daubney yet. So there you go.
Yet. Wow. Let's move on now, because a veterans charity, it was on the brink of closing. But the Spearhead Foundation has now reached its funding targets to keep their premises open.
Yes, the charity that do humanitarian work in Ukraine has worked with hundreds of our veterans, both current and former members of the armed forces and emergency services.
And you at home have been a big, big part of this, with your generous donations keeping this place open. So let's talk now to the founder of the Spearhead Foundation, Craig Monagans. Craig, what a good news story.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I feel a bit like overwhelmed with it, to be honest. Obviously, to hit the target and go above the target has been yeah.
I mean, it's quite incredible, isn't it? I can see you're quite emotional about it. Were you not expecting this outpour of support?
No, not at all. So we obviously had a target to raise of like £12,800. We've gone beyond that. We've actually ended up raising £13,866, and then on top of the back of all the coverage that yourselves have given us today, the Mike Gooley Trail Finders charity has been contacted and donated £50,000 as well. So
wow.
So yeah, it's a bit overwhelming. It's a bit of an overwhelming day.
That's fantastic. So what does this mean for the charity then? What can you do that you couldn't do before, apart from stay open, of course?
So obviously, what led us into that situation was we had a funder for the building, and unfortunately, due to the current climate, they had to basically make a choice between paying their staff or staying committed to the donation to ourselves. So that was where the big risk was, because hundreds of people come through our doors every week, was to keep that building open. And just by the donations raised today, and additional to what the Mike Gooley Trail Finders charity have supplied as well, that will secure the building for a year and allow us to broaden our reach and to continue the work we've been doing, where we're getting veterans to work into the community and to get them back on their feet, obviously following trauma as well.
Well, it's such important work you do, and I know all of us at GB News want to say, well, just best of luck to you, because so often I think veterans in this country, they get a raw deal of it. Once they leave the armed forces, people are often left out in the cold, and you do absolutely amazing work, Craig. Thanks so much for everything you do, and all the best for the Spearhead Foundation.
It's true. Our viewers and listeners care deeply about veterans. When we hear stories of homeless veterans being left in mouldy buildings, not being looked after, not having mental health support, not having job support, not being treated well, it pains us. So there you go. Good stuff. A nice news story to bring you for once.
It does feel like good to have a bit of good news. But if you're in search of some brighter weather as well as brighter news, here's the forecast for some of those top European holiday destinations.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello, if you're looking for any winter sun, it's going to be wet as we end the week in Portugal, fine in Italy, unusually cold in Greece. Through the Greek islands, we've got this northerly wind blowing, 6 Celsius in Athens, just 7 for Mykonos, that's 8 degrees lower than average. But for Italy, mostly fine with sunny spells, although for Portugal, we've got a spell of rain moving in, and as that crosses Iberia, that's going to turn to showers at the weekend, whilst temperatures gradually recover in Greece.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come. Do stay with us. Is comedy the best medicine, or has the NHS become a laughing stock? Find out more after
From a
this.
comedian.
Hello. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's turned a lot milder, but it's also turned wet and windy, and many of us will have a pretty soggy and blustery couple of days, thanks to low pressure systems and their weather fronts which have been marching in. Look at the number of isobars across the UK. It is gusty, particularly close to these bands of rain, one of which bringing some heavy downpours across western Scotland, North Wales through the lunchtime period, then into northwest England, southern Scotland, some hailstones mixed in with the heavy rain and gusty winds. Spells of rain too across the southeast, something a bit drier elsewhere, and it may brighten up a little bit in a few places, and if it does, could see temperatures 14, 15 degrees. It is mild, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily feel that mild, particularly with the wind and the rain. Still some heavy bursts of rain crossing northern England through this evening's rush hour, and still some lively showers moving across Scotland also, but some decent clear spells, and overall it will be turning drier as we go through this evening, certainly for much of Northern Ireland. Still quite breezy, however. The heavy downpour should be easing from northern England by about 7, 8 o'clock, and the rain also clearing through the late evening from parts of Kent, which will leave many places dry for a time, but down to the southwest more rain starts to gather, and that moves in through the early hours. Again, some bright colours there, some heavy downpours, particularly for Wales, Northern Ireland, and spreading into Scotland. Look at the temperatures, a very mild night, many places staying in double digits. But the wind and the rain could cause some disruption during Friday. We've got warnings in place across West Wales, the east of Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and central Scotland, where the rain will persist. The warnings for wind and for rain. Much of eastern England having a dry day on Friday till that rain comes in through the evening time. And again, it will be very mild, just won't necessarily feel that way.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Right, 2:47 is the time, and is laughter really the best medicine? We always laugh on this show, don't we?
We do.
At points. Comedy shows are set to be prescribed by the NHS for patients struggling with mental health conditions. I sense a little bit of sarcasm there from Tom, thank you very much. But the tech company Crate Hill is running the trial, which includes stand-up shows and improv workshops, in a bid to get people laughing again.
Well, it all comes as figures show 8.7 million people in England took antidepressants in 2023 to the end of 24. So, do we just need to laugh it all off?
8.7 million people in just England. Antidepressants in 1 year, wow. Well, let's pose that question to GB News host and comedian Josh Howie. Josh, does comedy make you less depressed, Josh?
Well, we could ask my wife and get her opinion on it. It depends. Yes, of course. I think the question is whether it's a quick fix. There's obviously a problem of mental health in this country. So why not try this one particular thing? I'm not saying let's chuck millions at it. Unless they're going to give some of it to me, then I'm totally fine with it. But it's comedy helps people. It does work. People do go for a night out. And if they are seeing hopefully good comedians, then they're going to really benefit from it. And that's why we have headliners on GB News, in terms of we have a comedy show at the end of the day. People can watch the news and we can talk about it in a funny way. And hopefully people go to sleep or they wake up with the repeat and they feel good.
Yeah, I think there is some science to suggest, the more you smile, the more you laugh. Well, the endorphins are released and you sort of, your body reacts to that. I don't know if it's all psychological or biological or whatever the sort of logical it works out as. I mean, some people do generally feel better for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we need in this country is more therapists, is the reality of it. And just chucking people on pills is not the solution. And maybe we need to also be building a better country so that people aren't so constantly depressed. But at the same time, if there is some evidence to it, I don't know how they're going to sort of work out the data, what they're going to sort of quantify on it. And also, of course, this company, they seem, from what I've read, I hate using the word, but they seem a little bit woke. You're like, are they really actually going to be giving audiences good comedians?
Well, Josh, this is what I was going to come to, because I found myself at a comedy show in North London a couple of years ago, and it made me more depressed. Because the jokes were just so lame. There was one comedian who was about to make a fat joke, but then he looked around the room, got scared that people might be offended, even though everyone there was skinny anyway. And there were many jokes about Donald Trump, Orange Man, bad, that weren't funny at all. I mean, keep the politics maybe out of the comedy. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, politics is fine, but just sort of doing the sort of regime comedy where you're just backing everything up. Comedy is meant to challenge. So I don't really know who they are seeking to get into this, but comedy at its best is obviously amazing. But you're right, it's the comedy as a whole, as an industry, have been a bunch of scaredy cats and haven't sort of done our job of breaking boundaries, of pushing things. All we've done is kind of reinforce the narrative that the people in power want us to reinforce. And that's comedy's failing. So you're right, maybe people are going to go and see people like that and they're going to get more depressed. But what I would say is anybody depressed, watch GB News at 11 o'clock at night.
There's only so many jokes you can hear about, how bad the Tories are before you get a bit bored.
Yeah, it is one of these things. But I suppose, Josh, there is a real question here. Is watching comedians actually just a proxy for the real best medicine, which is having a laugh with your mates? Going down the pub and having sort of friendship and conversations and interactions. I mean, is that what really we're sort of all grasping for here?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. No, I think that's exactly it. I mean, I don't have any friends, so I can't really answer from personal experience. But yes, that's what people need. They need to get out there. They need to socialise. This isn't, by the way, going to a comedy club isn't, I believe, the totality of this programme. They're talking about gardening or going walking, socialising and being with other human beings. And of course, that's what we lacked during lockdown, was that human intimacy and one-on-oneness. That's where we need to get out there. In fact, you've inspired me, Tom. I'm going to use my afternoon off now. I'm going to keep the kids at home and I'm going to go down the pub and see if anyone will talk to me.
Fantastic.
Uh-oh. You're going to be the weirdo in the pub. I'm joking, Josh. I like comedy, though, about, frivolous things like... because, obviously, we talk about the news all day. I like to kind of turn my brain off and listen to things about silly things like dating or family issues or that sort of thing,
I like comedy about, the Second World War and rocket ships. Josh, before you go, I've just got to ask you, have you been sort of hung up on a peg in the corner? Have you got sort of masked gunmen around you? You seem very much pressed into a corner there. I don't know. Are you OK? Blink twice if you're...
This is the only corner. I could give you a little tour. This is the only corner in our flat where
what are we going to see?
This is the only part. Every other part of the flat is either dirty or has a child there.
Right, OK, it's a safety corner.
The one bit I've got that's slightly away from everybody.
Fantastic.
He's got a big brood.
I hope everything's OK in your corner. And we'll see you very soon. Thanks for joining us.
To be over. I just want half-term to be done.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine that.
And there's a guarantee you'll feel less depressed if you switch on headliners at 11 o'clock every night. Thank you very much indeed, Josh Howie. Great to speak to you to end the show. So there you go. I'm feeling more happy already. Do you know, you should actually physically force yourself to smile. Apparently it's meant to just even forcing yourself to smile.
Yeah, it gets all those dolphins swimming around the system. Endorphins. No, that's the one. Right, OK, thanks for watching us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
If you're still here.
If you've put up with us for that long. But of course, the wonderful, the only Dawn Neeson is up next. Stick around.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's turned a lot milder, but it's also turned wet and windy, and many of us will have a pretty soggy and blustery couple of days, thanks to low pressure systems and their weather fronts which have been marching in. Look at the number of isobars across the UK. It is gusty, particularly close to these bands of rain, one of which bringing some heavy downpours across western Scotland, North Wales through the lunchtime period, then into northwest England, southern Scotland, some hailstones mixed in with the heavy rain and gusty winds. Spells of rain too across the southeast, something a bit drier elsewhere, and it may brighten up a little bit in a few places, and if it does, could see temperatures 14-15 degrees. It is mild, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily feel that mild, particularly with the wind and the rain. Still some heavy bursts of rain crossing northern England through this evening's rush hour, and still some lively showers moving across Scotland also, but some decent clear spells, and overall it will be turning drier as we go through this evening, certainly for much of Northern Ireland. Still quite breezy, however. The heavy downpour should be easing from northern England by about 7, 8 o'clock, and the rain also clearing through the late evening from parts of Kent, which will leave many places dry for a time, but down to the southwest more rain starts to gather, and that moves in through the early hours. Again, some bright colours there, some heavy downpours, particularly for Wales, Northern Ireland, and spreading into Scotland. Look at the temperatures, a very mild night, many places staying in double digits. But the wind and the rain could cause some disruption during Friday. We've got warnings in place across West Wales, the east of Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and central Scotland, where the rain will persist. The warnings for wind and for rain. Much of eastern England having a dry day on Friday till that rain comes in through the evening time. And again, it will be very mild, just won't necessarily feel that way.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be one of 2 lucky Great British giveaway winners? That's right, you could win one of 2 prize bundles, which includes a brand new iPhone 16, £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in your favourite store, and an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. What would you spend that cash on? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
As we kick off 2025, many of us might be thinking about a bit of a wardrobe refresh, especially if you're over 50 and you feel like the high street doesn't quite cater to you.
Indeed, that's